All right, now we're live. Basically, this is just a Good Friday hangout. So it's a BYOT, bring your own topic. So if you have a good topic you want to discuss, come on in and we can chat. But what were you saying, bro, Joe? You said you made a post?
Yeah, I was addressing you in a post because I thought I was a little concerned and I wanted to bring something up to you.
Okay.
Okay, do you mind having a conversation about it?
Yeah, give me a minute so I can get my earphones. There's somebody in the background just
Okay.
acting up.
Yeah,
Give me a minute.
yeah, I think I'd be interested in continuing that little exchange we had last night.
Right.
Give me one.
Antonio, so I don't know how interesting this conversation is going to be. So,
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
yep.
Your last night's hangout, your hangout last night, Antonio, was really good. I actually liked it. I learned a lot, actually, to be honest with you, especially about modalism and the Trinity. I was a little confused about that topic, but this guy, what's his name, Jimmy? He really
Yeah,
fleshed it out for me. So.
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'll tell you one thing, man. Jimmy and Alex just took that hangout over, and in a very, very good and edifying ways. I just let those brothers
Praise God.
speak, man. Yeah, amen.
I'm back. Even though
Yeah,
I couldn't find my earphones, but I'll just wing it.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second myself.
good. I know Brojo wanted to conversate with you.
I know I've heard the streets have been talking.
Yeah, nobody's on the street, but yeah. I saw you and Antonio's hangout last night, and right after I left, I saw you come in, and you made claims against original sin. You made claims against Calvinism, but more interesting that more well, let me say this.
Interestingly, that's
Yeah,
a
more
word.
interestingly. Okay, yeah, it sounds weird. I find it interesting that you said, well, if God was like this, he'd be evil. I wouldn't serve him. I'd be a Christian right now if Calvinism was true. I don't actually want to talk about Calvinism, but I do think to have that attitude is not godly. It's not Christian-like. And then when you say, well, God would become evil, okay, then there's another problem because you're doing what the atheists are doing. You're reasoning independent from God when you can't do that. Okay. Second, God is the arbiter of what right and wrong is. God determines what right and wrong is. So when you start saying, "Oh no, if God was like this, God was like," I wouldn't worship him, I wouldn't serve him. I got to say, this guy cannot be a Christian talking like this. Now, another main problem that I see is there seems to be this theme of univocism, where one wants to reason independent from God. When one says, well, truth is that which comports to reality, but the Bible, we see some places are contradicting reality, therefore Adam and Eve could not have existed. And that's where I start to say Romans chapter 1 says people are suppressing the truth and the righteousness because of their sin. They're suppressing it by their sin. And when you're saved, you get regenerated. And what happens is you have a new man and an old man, and they're constantly warring, right? The flesh is against the spirit against the flesh. And so you have your old man, which constantly is trying to suppress the knowledge of God, telling you, oh, this is what this is. And you're just saying, oh, that's right. I have a major problem with that because everything that we see in the world should be interpreted in light of what God says. So I just want to address you on all that thing, on all those things. So go ahead.
Um. Okay. I really don't have anything to say. So yeah, I said that yesterday, and that's my opinion, and I think I'm right, and that's all I can pretty much say.
Well,
So are you?
Well, with that said, I still want to press you a little more about this issue that death was in the world before Adam and Eve was, or um, if you even agree that they even existed at all. But you said that like death was something that was just always was. It didn't enter the world; it was just there, right?
Yeah, hold on. Who's Thomas? Do any of you guys know Thomas? No.
Yeah, I know Thomas.
Oh, okay, I just didn't know who he was. I'm like, who's this guy?
Is he a Christian? No.
No, he's an atheist, but he's cool.
Oh no, sure.
Okay.
Everybody's welcome as long as they're not a troll or anything. Anybody is welcome. Hey
No.
Thomas, how are you doing? Is your mic working?
Yeah, Thomas, yeah.
But what were you saying last
doing
night?
alright.
This little Hebrew word that you talked about last night to support your claim.
Hold on 1 minute, because I didn't get a chance to hear Thomas. Thomas, if you can talk, you can be heard, so I can see if your mic is working. Use the side chat just to let me know, because I don't want you to be in the Hangout and you can't talk.
Well, no, he unmuted before. He just has some difficulties with his microphone.
All right, I'll give him a minute. But so yeah, Antonio, you know what's funny? I actually hold on 1 minute. I got people in the background.
I'm not gonna lie. That conversation between Bro Joe and Wayne, I expected more.
Well, you know what? I easy. Let me keep my mouth closed.
Sorry about that. But I actually don't believe it's necessary to believe that Adam and Eve were historical people in order for you to make the Genesis account consistent with the gospel. Adam and Eve very well could just be archetypal roles. It's funny, they could be. You could say they are historical figures and they're also archetypal. Or you could just say they're archetypal roles, but they weren't historical. And Paul's narrative still could work.
Are you talking about like
so
genetic Eve and genetic? Are you talking about like genetic Eve and genetic Adam? Like when geneticists go back in the DNA and they say, all human beings come from this line, and this is what we call genetic Eve and genetic Adam. Is that kind of what your philosophy is?
Not necessarily. So you actually could take that position, right? Where like you do, you have this evolutionary paradigm where there is a genetic Adam and Eve, and then somewhere along the line, then you get to the Adam and Eve that were in the garden. So because I do believe there were other people before that Adam and Eve, but as a matter of fact, Adam and Eve just literally mean the man and the woman. So they weren't really these specific characters like we think they were. Like Adam's actual name wasn't Adam. Adam isn't a name. Adam is it's more or less of a noun, right? Like my name is not the Wayne. My name is Wayne. So Adam's name, or we think Adam was his name, but that wasn't his name. It literally means the man. But more or less, you don't have to take the Genesis account, especially like the Adam and Eve part. You don't need to make them historical figures in order for the narrative to be consistent with Paul's Adam. Like I don't think Paul talking about is it 2 Corinthians, right, where he says the first Adam brought sin into the world, and then the second Adam saved us. I'm just paraphrasing. You don't need to believe that Adam's a historical figure to make it consistent with the gospel narrative. I think is a stumbling block, because either way you can make it work. I could see it work both ways.
My problem again is this reasoning that says we can determine what is true apart from the revelation of God. Okay, there is no way to arrive at such conclusion unless you start externally and then work your way to the Bible. Okay, that's a major problem. But I guess you don't want to talk about that. So that's just my comment on, it's not necessary for them to exist. It doesn't really matter what we think is necessary. I think what matters is what the Word of God says, and let's obey it.
Okay. That's all I can pretty much say. I'm not really going into the precept thing today. I didn't really plan on it, but sure.
That's not precept. That's biblical theology.
So, Brojo, is it? Are you saying this should be a more literal? In other words, Wayne should read it in a more literal sense. Like there are literal and Adam and Eve, and there's a correction that needs to be made in that interpretation.
Yeah, I'm saying if we read the text, we can see there are several mentions in the New Testament, according to Jesus, that talk about the first man, right? We see in 2 Timothy that Eve was deceived, became the transgressor. We see things like that. And I think ultimately to arrive at this conclusion that, these people may not actually have existed, or they may be metaphorical. They're not. I think you're going to have to do a major rewriting of what the Bible basically says flat on its surface. And I think that's a major problem. Again, this is not precept. This is what I call biblical theology and how a Christian should think. Just not precept.
So how would you reconcile Adam and Eve not being names? Like Adam literally means the human, and Eve literally means the woman. So how would you reconcile that with your literalism?
And that just means that their name was the man and the woman, if that's what their names means.
Right. Just like he made took the rib, and she was the woman because she was part of man. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it symbolizes.
What I'm hearing is I don't hear any agreement.
Hold on.
Any agreement from the group on the origin and the age of the universe, and how you square the text of the Bible in with the time frame that we are aware of.
Hold on, I think you shifted us off topic because we're talking about the literal part of the Genesis account versus Wayne's interpretation.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. There's no way that literally it cannot square with what we know about
the problem,
the actual
Thomas.
age of
That's the problem
nature.
I keep pointing out to Wayne. We don't reason independently from God. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take your human reasoning.
So you're saying you're choosing to suspend your rational mind in order to accept.
No. What I am saying is, I'm choosing to suspend here's what I'm saying. I'm choosing to suspend my irrational mind because I know it's been affected by sin after the fall of man. So I know that God has revealed, and everything that I see must be interpreted in light of what He has revealed. That's what I'm saying.
Are you assuming that our rational mind is independent of God to begin with?
Brojo?
Oh, was that addressed to me?
No, that was addressed to Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
What was the question?
Yeah, repeat the question.
I said, are you assuming that our rational mind is independent of God to begin with?
No, I'm not assuming that. Well, unless you're wanting to say that God is a creation of our rational mind, yeah, I agree with that. Because man has created God.
I think Brojo's point was that we're to think God's thoughts after Him, and we're supposed to reason as creatures who were truly created by God, and have our thoughts be derivative from Him, and think in light of what He's revealed, both His redemptive plan and just His simple providence that He's given us, and we're supposed to.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And by the way, Alex, no precept.
Well, one thing one thing I'm hearing, and this is just there seems to be two arguments going on here. There's one argument saying that if, for instance, if science conflicts with the Bible, you're going to believe in the Bible. You're going to believe the Bible because without the Bible, you know that's how you have the foundation for reason.
That's not what I said, but I understand how you're getting that.
But so if I've mischaracterized your argument, please correct me.
My point is not that science is conflicting with the Bible. My point is, we understand because of our sinful natures that sin affects our mind. We see in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 5 that we are to bring every thought into obedience to Christ. We see that because our rationale has been seriously affected. So all I'm saying is what we're going to have to do as Christians, we're going to have to take what we see in the world and interpret it in light of what God has said. We're gonna have to take God's word. We're gonna have to trust the infallible, all-knowing, all-powerful God who's created the heavens and the earth. John 1:3. Without him, nothing will be made that is made. And we're gonna take his interpretation of the facts. If he says this is 6,000, 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 billions of years, we're gonna have to say that's what it is. It doesn't matter if we see trillions of years. Because what happens is our sinful nature chooses to suppress the knowledge of God. That's why it says they suppress the truth in unrighteousness.
So that doesn't explain dinosaurs.
What?
All right, I'm back. What's the topic of discussion?
What we're talking about, it seems to be, is that there's the literal interpretation versus, I think you're trying to say that there's a meaning to it. Like, for instance, Adam means the man.
Tell me this.
Eve means
What laws of the Old Testament do you think the Old Testament law should be followed? The whole law?
I don't think he's saying that. I think he's made.
So
I
I'm
think
asking that.
No.
But I think he made it
If
very
he's wanting
clear.
if he's wanting to make the Bible a literal document to live your life by in society, are you saying that you want to live by the whole law in the Old Testament?
Thomas.
Oh no, I don't even think we got there yet. But
I don't
my
think he's saying that.
Well, I mean, I can cut to the meat in a hurry.
Well, you're
And
not
do
even
away with
at
all
You're
it.
jumping the gun here, Thomas.
Here's the problem. You've cut into a
I'm
different
not
meat
jumping
because
the
we're not
gun.
on that. We're in a different.
There's real life
we're in
implications
different-
Yeah,
to
different-
holding these
we
beliefs
can move off of that, but I'll just give a quick answer to that.
on society.
I'll give a quick answer to that. I'd say that if you are going to take the Bible literally, then you'd also have to take Hebrews literally, in that it says that we now live under a new covenant, and that the old covenant is abolished and has passed away. So I would say what Burge was talking about is more of a literal interpretation, not in regards to application of Old Testament laws, but more so in interpreting things like Genesis 1.
What do you think, Daniel?
Wayne, what were you saying, Wayne?
Yeah, I was just saying that the Genesis account, you can take it literally, you can take it metaphorical. It really doesn't matter, especially because the point of the Genesis account isn't trying to give you science. I don't think the ancient people were trying to give us a modern scientific textbook. They had a completely different worldview than we do. They had a completely different cosmology. They didn't know anything about evolutionary genetics or biology or Big Bang nucleosynthesis or anything like that. They basically, the Genesis account is them trying to explain the universe around them theologically as it relates to how they understood the world. And the main meaning or the moral of the story is that God created everything, God is in control, and God made mankind, and we're all sinners. And once you can...
I just want to I just want to say you're missing the point. It's not that they're trying to figure out how to reconcile things, because this is what we see in secular thought, where the secularists will say, oh, what we have is these men, and you know, who were, let's say, cavemen. They didn't know anything, but they were trying to figure out everything around them, so they named it God. But the point is, here's the point.
Wait.
Here's what the scripture is.
You can't snowball me. One point at a time. So
okay, but let me finish my point. I didn't finish that point.
Let me just respond to that really quickly.
Okay.
I'm not saying they were stupid or anything. I'm not saying they were dumb and like they simply just didn't know. In the same way how we don't know certain things today, right? And so what we do is we try and reconcile our theology with what we do know in science. And as we gain more knowledge about the natural world, we also revise what we think when it comes to our theology. So as we get to know more and more scientifically, we also reconcile it theologically, and that's what they did in the past, and we keep on doing that as time goes on. So
let me comment on that.
Not the part.
You've laid out a few points that I'd like to rebut. First off, the major problem again is you're starting backwards. You're going to the world, which is a fallen world. If you remember what it says in Genesis, the ground beneath us was cursed, right? And so you're starting with the world, which is a major problem, not only because the world has been cursed, not only because things are changed, but other than that, the scriptures are God breathed. All scripture is God breathed, breathed out by God. So it doesn't have to be that these men are trying to figure these things out. It could be God, who knows all things, who created all things, breathing out his message through men. And they're inspired. So it doesn't have to be, we have to reconcile this, it just be, what does God say? Because if all scripture is God breathed, theanostas, then that's all we need. It's not men without the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. It's men guided by the Holy Spirit.
Well, let me ask you.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I want to ask is one thing I'm going to say as a statement is that I would agree. I would say I believe each one of us in here have seen interpretations of the Bible that we feel to be false. Like there's, we have the King James version, we have the New International, but then there are other versions that most people in here there are some issues with them and we wouldn't agree with, but it's even worse than that because the original Bible, or the original text, has been translated multiple times. That what we all believe to be the text may have some differences. I would say that I would agree with you, Brojo, that at the beginning, the first people to maybe get the original text God may have been speaking it to them directly. But I believe in all these different incantations that we have now, that we're trying to interpret now, there's a huge difference in what we know now as just as human beings, and I think it's a telephone game. One word in Greek could mean something totally different in English, but we are reading the English version. So I have to agree with Wayne in the sense that I think the principles of Christianity, which I think everybody in this room, except for me, follows. But I think the whether Adam and Eve was a real person or not, I don't think that has anything to do with your salvation.
Here's the thing. Let me respond to that because
I want to respond as well.
Yeah, let me address the ending there. What you're talking about is, the Bible may have been messed up here, losing fragment pieces. I don't think we have any evidence that Adam and Eve didn't exist, unless you can show me that the early Jews didn't hold to Adam and Eve, that the early church didn't hold to Adam and Eve, and that the Bible has just been so messed up. But unless you can point to something where there was this entire rewriting of the Bible, or where the Bible is completely changed, then I don't think that claim holds any water. It's just prejudicial conjecture.
Yeah, and that, but MP, because you're saying it's like a telephone game, and that's what Berger was addressing, and Watson brought up a great point about that. You're kind of smuggling in this presupposition that the Bible is not inspired, that it is like all other books, and that it is corruptible. But I would have to disagree with you in that sense, and I think that some of the claims that you're making are good testing marks to see, does somebody know what they're talking about when they talk about textual criticism and things like that? Because when it comes to translating from Greek to English, we have a remarkably accurate text. So I don't think it's fair to just smuggle in that these claims. Yeah. But I would say, Wayne.
Well, it may have been more of me, because my point wasn't that the text was actually inaccurate today, but what I was trying to make the point is that even, let's say, if Wayne believed that Adam and Eve were real people, or they weren't real people, I don't think. And maybe I may be wrong because I'm not a Christian, but it just didn't seem to be as important as the belief in Jesus, the belief that he died for your sins, the belief in God. Those beliefs seem to be paramount to being saved, rather than believing Adam and Eve were real people. You understand what I mean?
I actually want to add on to what Alex said as well. And if we look at like how the Bible is passed down over time, we have just a remarkably accurate representation. I mean, when we were looking at how the Bible was passed down, we got to look at the scribes who went through the process of Bibles and passing them down over generations, they couldn't do stuff like whole phrases and whole paragraphs and stuff. Like they did stuff like letter by letter, and they had people check and recheck and check and recheck like individual letters over and over again. It was like one person did one thing, and then another person rechecked it, and then another person rechecked the same thing, and then they did this all the way down to the letter, not down to a word, not down to a phrase or a paragraph or a sentence. They did this down to the letter. They were very, very meticulous in
Right, and
how they passed down the word.
And they still made mistakes, which is what you is what you would expect, because the Bible is a human product. As a product of humans, God used humans so he can make, get his point across, and humans aren't perfect. So
that's not the point, Wayne. That's not the point, though.
I think the analogy would be pouring perfect water through a dirty filter, because if your filter's bad, the water and the output is still going to be bad. Now, I'm not saying that God couldn't make it so the filter could be perfect and the message could be perfect, but we would all agree, because it's almost like you guys are making a claim that all Bibles today are perfect, but we all agree that there are Bibles out there that are interpretations of the Bible. No, I'm saying it's almost like that's what I'm hearing, but I would believe that there are Bibles out there that we would all agree are not correct, and
I think that's a discussion for another time. And if you'd like to have a discussion one-on-one about that on my channel, I'd love to do that. But Rain, I had one question: is science interpreted in light of one's worldview?
Absolutely.
Did the scientists that discovered evolution come to that conclusion through a biblical worldview?
No, not necessarily.
Do you think that somebody coming to the table with Christian presuppositions would have came to the conclusion of evolution?
Possibly, maybe.
Could you describe how that's possible?
Well, you know what? There was a guy who came somewhat to a scientific conclusion a couple hundred years before Darwin existed. You know what? Can I bring up the quote? I'll bring up the quote as I'm talking, and I'll see if it'll load. But Saint Basil the Great, he actually saw fishes and birds. Even though his deduction was sort of flawed, he had the right idea in mind. This guy
was he a Catholic?
It is accurate to say that evolution did not just start with Charles Darwin.
Because most Catholics have an epistemology of the world. They take their philosophy from the world. They ascribe to natural theology. So I don't think that appealing to them would do you any good. We're talking about a biblical worldview philosophy, because you're going to get your philosophy of fact from the Bible, because we can't just assume that we have these facts apart from the revelation of God. So I just think if we're going to be honest with each other at the outset, you could at least admit that no, coming from a biblical worldview, then jumping into science in light of what God has revealed to us in his word, you would not come to the conclusion of evolution.
Right. Yeah, and that's really I'm going to add to that. That's the problem again with univocism, with this.
Is he cutting out for you guys too, or is he just
this monistic assumption.
Brojo, start over again. You cut out, man.
Yeah, this is the problem that I see with univocism, that we all have facts and we're all reasoning on the same plane with God. We're not. Okay, so that's all I want to say. That's a major problem with that way of thinking.
I mean, so the one problem that I have with sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Well, I was just gonna say, somebody actually brought this up in the side chat. Carlos Linnaeus, he actually was he was a creationist. He believed in God. On his taxonomy book that he actually was writing, where he would record his notes, he had written God creates, but Linnaeus arranges. And Carlos Linnaeus, he was the guy who classified humans as Homo sapiens. This was hundreds of years before Darwin even lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so he understood, like, we are Homo sapiens, we are apes. And this was before evolution even took off. So that's another guy who believed in God, had a biblical worldview, and he had to accept the fact that we are apes.
I think that one of the things to point out, and that's a good example. I was going to bring that up as well. But the thing is, the idea and concept of evolution has been around for longer than just Darwin. Okay, when people for
no one never made the claim against that, by the way, Sokka. But go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I was just saying this because it was accepted. That's the point. It was accepted by different people with different theologies for over 1,000 years before Darwin was there. When Darwin and what was the other guy's name, Wallace, were kind of like sitting on the topic there, they came up with what their major contribution to it was providing kind of a mechanism. That's what they brought to the table. That's why they're often credited with it, turning it into, the theory of evolution, because of those reasons. But I mean, it wasn't a controversial topic, but the point that I wanted to bring up though was this idea that we're talking about somebody approaching it from a biblical worldview, and it's really reminiscent now of if you go and you take a look at a lot of creationist sites that will put forward like statements of faith, like right onto their sites there, where they'll say that hey, we're scientists, we're going to go out and we're going to do scientific research, but the moment that something contradicts with our biblical views, we're going to automatically dismiss it. And I'm wondering
whether that's how all worldviews work.
No, well, not necessarily, because there's entirely.
Sokka. I don't think they do. Clear. They dismiss what? Oh, we're going to dismiss what we. Okay, I'm going to agree. That's how worldviews work. I'm done talking.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I understand that that's how you guys think that people approach things, but it's a little more nuanced than that. People will have different ideas how they want to try to fit within their paradigm of what they believe, but you get to a certain point when there's overwhelming evidence and you have to change what your beliefs on this are. So, for example, a good example would this be when we moved from like there was like Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics was like the thing for hundreds of years. Newton was a genius. And then you have Einstein come along, and he wasn't trying to prove anything. He further elaborated on this idea and came into concepts like relativity. Now, that was rejected when it first came out. A lot of people had this kind of like this idea. It's like, no, we've got this figured out. You relativity is wrong, whatever. There was a lot of pushback on this, and it took a really long time for people to start accepting it. But what changed people's views on this was the fact that they couldn't deny it any longer. It doesn't matter what their worldview was. Under the weight of overwhelming evidence, they had to adjust their views because they just couldn't hold that anymore. And so people do change their views on these things. The only time that people don't change their views on it is when you have a position like where you have to start off and state right off the bat, like, listen, hey, we are going to reject anything that contradicts our worldview, that there's no room for movement. And the place where we see this now is a lot with close to home subject here within Christian Science.
Nobody said that people couldn't change. Nobody said that people couldn't change worldview. So I don't really see your point.
Let's quote that last thing you said. You said that we said that we're going to reject anything that contradicts our worldview. No, I think that we reject the notion that there will be something interpreted correctly that would contradict our worldview. And right. I'd say that when we deal with all of these worldviews, it seems as if it's only Christianity who comes with this notion and that all these atheistic worldviews are so open to change. Well, it's a little different because they have a range of beliefs that are compatible with their worldview. But it just so happens that in regards to Christianity, that range is very narrow and it's limited to what God has revealed in His Word. So I'd say it does work that way for all worldviews, but just it has a different range of acceptability.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But here's the point: is how far do you have to push on your range of acceptability before you realize that either your interpretation is wrong or something is wrong within the text? And I mean, so here's the thing with
and you just missed the point again. But go ahead.
I haven't missed the point.
No, you have missed the point. What have I been repeating over and over?
Wait. Let him be heard.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
So here's the thing: is that you have Wayne in this room, who's a Christian, and you have Antonio, Brojo, Alex here, who are also Christians. Now, the main difference between you guys is that his range has opened up. He's been able to to take what he observes in reality and realizes that what, there is overwhelming evidence that this is the case. Okay, now this goes against a literalist interpretation of this worldview. So obviously there was something wrong with the way that I was interpreting something, or that there was just a problem with the interpretation. So what he's done is that he's broadened his range, and he said, hey, listen, can this still make sense if I broaden my range of interpretation on this? And he's come to the conclusion, yes, absolutely. And I'm sure Wayne can defend that. And if you ask him, he will defend it.
That's okay. Now,
so here's the thing.
Okay,
sorry,
well, I'm in the middle of this.
one last point,
okay.
Brojo.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, is that it's not that
just real quick, Saka, can you show your points a little bit?
He just cut me off.
He takes forever to make his point. I was just asking him to show his point.
Just let him wrap up.
Okay. So here's the point: is that when you get to the point where you think that you believe that you have a Christian worldview, when you realize that your interpretation of the Christian worldview might be wrong, because you're not defending the Christian worldview right now, you're defending your interpretation of it.
Okay, all right. Let me, Antonio, do you want to respond to that or no?
You can go ahead if you want to.
Right. Let me say this, and Saki, you gotta slow down. Just whatever. I don't want to comment on that, but it was really fast. I got all of it, but I think the point is right. Is that we're saying all things must be interpreted in light of what God has said. When one says, okay, all things are not to be interpreted in light of what God says, let me reach out over here. You have basically went from rational thinking to irrational. You've left thinking God's thoughts after him to appealing to your old man, like I said before, which seeks to suppress the knowledge of God. That is what your old man does. Go ahead.
So Brojo laid out clearly how we should interpret the Bible, but I say that Wayne says we're going to interpret what God said through natural theology, through what is interpreted by atheistic thinking. I think he's taking the thinking of atheists and interpreting what God has said in light of that, and not let God speak for himself. And I think that's the problem.
Right. And
go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm going to let you continue. Not for me to say. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I'm trying to understand is that it seems like there's a division saying that if you believe in evolution, then you're not holding to the Christian worldview, because there's a conflict in that in this particular way. And Wayne is holding to both, and that's where you guys believe the conflict is. But what I would ask is that if there is a conflict, then it seems like this is a minority position. You guys are making it seem like this is the majority position, but this is the fact that you guys are saying that evolution conflicts with the Christian worldview is a minority position. So how can you guys then justify it being a minority position within the Christian worldview? Because, for instance, I know you guys don't accept Catholics as Christians, but if you go to Pew Research Center, an overwhelming majority of Christians do believe in common descent and evolution from the polls. So why would that be? And I know that it's kind of a argument ad populam, but it seems like
we could go over those polls, because
see you later, man. You're gonna remove DD from the Hangout. See ya. Have a good night, guys.
Yeah, I'm leaving too, because Wayne is completely a compromiser. All right, I'm out.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Well,
let me just lay out the gospel really quick. Read 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. Someone needs to repent and get saved. I'm out.
Okay.
I mean, I don't understand that. Like, what's like? I understand that they want to go off and defend DD in this, but DD removes more people from Hangouts than any other person out there. Like, I have never left a Hangout with DD by my own choice. I'm always removed. Usually it comes to the point where I've shown some type of flaw in his argument. but yet they have no problem with that.
Hey,
So,
don't get me wrong. I like Antonio and I like Brojo. I think they're both upstanding individuals. But what they did was just a coward's move because Didi, and it's funny because that means that as long as a Christian does it, Didi he can remove everybody, yell and scream. But when somebody removes him, then they can't be in a hangout. I think that's highly hypocritical. But I would tell them that if they were still here. I just think that was it's a very cowardice move.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like putting up with his stuff today. I've already seen him, like every hangout he walks into, he wrecks, and we were having a good flow, a good conversation, and we didn't need his input. So
he kind of, when he comes into a hangout, he wants to take over, and he has the same spiel. He's got that precept thing or whatever it is going on, and no one else can really talk about stuff.
No, but if you're in hangouts with Didi, he kicks everyone all the time, and now because he gets kicked, they want to leave. But that's his hypocrisy at the highest level. Because if he can't do it to if he can't take it, then he shouldn't be doing it, and they shouldn't be allowing him to do it if they can't take it either.
Thank you.
I want to go back to the topic though, and this is the point that I was trying to illustrate. I mean, it's the point that MP you were bringing up as well, and this is the point that they're not. I don't think that they're understanding here is that they believe wholeheartedly that they have the correct interpretation. Okay, that they have. Okay, this is first off, this is what we believe, and everything that we discover has to fit within these beliefs. Well, that's not how you go about anything. Because they're basing this on what they believe God said. Okay, in their worldview, the Bible is the revealed word of God, and they believe that they have the correct interpretation of this. Now, what we're talking about with the range of movement within those beliefs, there is you need to understand is that you don't know. They don't know what the correct interpretation is. That's what I'm saying is that I believe that let's say this was a God-breathed book there. The revelation for how to interpret it comes from what they would be the general revelation of the stuff around you. So if you have this general revelation, even within their worldview, that shows that the world is X amount of years old, well, that's revealed knowledge to you. I mean, Wayne, I'm pretty sure you'd agree with that. Is that the fact that you can date the age of the Earth to whatever year, you would put that in consideration or in the classification of something that is naturally revealed to you about the way that God has created the world.
Right.
Exactly. So they make pleas to natural or general revelation all the time, but yet they refuse it. They actually reject general revelation because they reject the reality of the way that the world is.
But Saka, you do have to, I'm being charitable here. You have to agree that there is from science, the science that we know, for instance, that like how the Bible says Adam was first, and then you have Eve. We know now, based on science, that isn't true. The first organism had to be female. It's the female, and the Y chromosome is actually a mutation of an X chromosome. But we know that through genetics. So that claim in the Bible isn't accurate. There are accurate things in the Bible, but some claims, the sun, there being Earth before the sun, and the order of creation, we know those claims are inaccurate. So I do believe that they do have a valid point in saying that if you do hold to these two contradictory belief systems, that one does have to give out. And what I think they're saying is that we're going to go with the biblical account versus the scientific account. But to say that you can just evolve throughout, because don't forget the Bible was created 2,000 years ago. There's no science in the Bible, but I think today, in trying to meld the two, you're going to have the only way I think you can possibly do it is the way Wayne is doing it, by saying it. Yes, he's interpreting it in a certain way to allow him to accept the science of today, even though in some ways it does contradict the biblical accounts.
Yeah, I had laid down early and I was asleep and woke up. I saw y'all on here and y'all were talking about the taking the Bible literally. And I kind of hate I came in late on that, so I'm sort of backing up a little bit. My apologies. But I just want to bring up that if you say you take the Bible literally, does that mean you take everything that's written down in there literally? Now, I know we can exclude the parables, and I know we can exclude Revelation, because at the very beginning, I think it says, or Paul or whatever says that I had this vision or something.
Right.
Now, Wayne, you can correct me on that, but I think that's what Revelation is. It's just a vision.
It's visions, yeah. Yep.
So the parables should not be taken literally, because he was using the parables to state, kind of to make, I think, what was it he called it, like spiritual things easy to handle. You can understand it by giving a little story, and then you associate it with something else that helps you understand what Christ or was said. I mean, what Christ was doing, or what God had done, or something like that. So in the Psalms were songs of praise. So how do you decide which part is literal and which part is poetic or whatever? So you could say like, well, no, you can't take the whole Bible absolutely literal. There are things there that give you hints. This is not real. This is not literal, and maybe this is. But if you take a lot of things, everything else literal, it's like Mark 9:47. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. That's what Christ said. So when you sin, if I took that literally, even as a child, I would have been blind from the age of 7.
But you know what, though? I think that's a bad analogy. Only reason why, because Christ did say he spoke in parables. So, and in that type of sense, that may not be his parables weren't really meant to be taken literally, and that's why
right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Though my sheep will know my voice.
Parable, though.
But I mean, this is the point that I was getting at. Is that all three of those guys that left recognize themselves in the category of presuppositional apologists. Okay, and within the presuppositional apologists, they like to view their epistemology as this revelational epistemology. They give arguments for the three types of revelations that they can get. One of those revelations is the general revelation, or the natural revelation of everything that is observed as evidence of God. But what they're saying is that that's not actually the case. What's observed is not evidence of God. What they observe has to be twisted to fit within the special revelation that they get through Scripture. So in fact, they're actually ruling out one of the main epistemic justifications they use to try to even support their argument for how they can know things. So they're actually contradicting themselves within their entire worldview.
See, I used to like Paul.
JJ, is this our JJ or just somebody different?
Same old JJ.
All right, you're scaring me for a minute because you changed your picture to like this gothic bunny rabbit.
Oh yeah. I might bring Captain Kirk back. We'll see.
Maybe I was going to mention Paul. I used to like Paul because
what the hell just happened though?
DD came
into the room and DD came in and I kicked him.
And then everybody just left?
Everybody just left because DD got kicked.
Because it's so unfair to kick someone out of the room,
That's funny. That's actually, it's not funny.
It's the height of hypocrisy.
Yeah. The pinnacle, maybe.
You're right.
It makes no sense. I'm not sure whether it was just because it was a conversation that they didn't want to have and they just use that as an excuse to get out of it. And I understand that. That's fine. I mean, like they're definitely being having their feet held to the fire in this conversation. But still, to use that as an excuse is just it's really bad because again, DD is the worst offender for kicking people out of a hangout unjustly. And he also has a known track record of just sabotaging hangouts. So
yeah, we all know this, right?
Whenever
we all know
kicks you out.
So what's the big deal? It's like, listen, this is something that we just don't want to deal with right now. He's gone. He can go to a different room. He can start up his own room. He can do whatever.
Right? Was he being instruction?
And here's the other thing. Here's the other thing too. His
chance to be.
Brojo the other day, gave me a blast of shit because he believed that I had given out the link to one of his hangouts, without asking his permission. I didn't, but that's what he believed, and that was a big thing for him. Well, did he ask anybody in this room whether or not he can invite DD?
Yeah, I don't know. I saw that he added him. I didn't know. In fact, I was looking for the YouTube link. I didn't know whose hangout it was. But I was trying to get somebody in particular to talk to him.
But DD,
so
I don't think would have been that bad, because it would have been, it's different because he didn't have mods. So I thought it would have been an interesting conversation. But I do think that it was the height of hypocrisy for them to leave, because this is what DD does. If he can't dictate the conversation and have mods in, he can't, have a rational conversation.
Well, but I do have a question, and Wayne, I'm going to kind of put you under the spotlight here for a second, if you don't mind. Is that when you did take a look at the Bible, they've come up with Bishop Osher, or whatever his name is, was one of the guys that kind of first came up with the idea of the genealogy in the 6,000-year-old Earth, because I think he dated like the genealogy before the birth of Christ back about 4,000 years.
He started with Adam and worked his way up.
Well, no, because there's two genealogies in the Bible. There's one in Matthew and one in Luke. One of them goes back to Abraham. The other one goes right back to Adam. Now, within that, what he did is he calculated the age. Now, I've heard General talk about this before, where they calculate the ages. So they don't believe that Adam lived to over 900 years old. That it was just the base number system that they used at that time. That he probably lived an average, the length of the time there. So do you also? So do you take the genealogy that's put forward in the Bible there as like a literal genealogy down to Adam being a first man, or do you believe that this is a genealogy back down to maybe the first man with a soul, or how do you kind of come to terms with this genealogy in the Bible, and how far it goes back?
From what I've read, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what I've read. Somebody from ASA, the ASA Foundation, which is associated with BioLogos, Carol Hill wrote an article on this, and basically she posited that the numbers in the Genesis genealogy, they aren't real numbers. Like, how we use real numbers when we go to the store and we trade and we buy things and etc. Those numbers are what's called, I think, sacred numbers, right? And so they will associate certain numerical values with certain either deities, or to give spiritual value to. For example, Anu was a ancient Near Eastern god or goddess, I think, and Anu was associated with the number 60. Now, Anu wasn't actually 60 years old, but the number 60 was associated with Anu to show how important she was. And so if you are in ancient Near Eastern and somebody Anu was 60, or 60 Anu, in your mind you would be able to understand, oh, this just means that out of all the ancient Near Eastern gods, because Anu has the highest number on the base 60 number value, that this goddess is extremely important. And so if you are in ancient Near Eastern looking at the Genesis account, you would know who was the least important and who was the most important, depending on which numerical value was associated with them in the genealogy.
Yeah, from what I was reading, Usher, he started with, it was like it could be divided up into three. I'm looking at the wiki thingy or something.
Sorry, before you continue, Heavy.
He starts with Adam and goes up to Solomon. And
Sir, Wayne, do you mind if I invite Hogtie?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Sorry to cut you off there. I just can't type in the side chat right now, Heavy.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention something about Paul. So I started to talk about Paul. I used to really like reading Paul because, they say like, well, the Bible was inspired by God. And holy men wrote as they were inspired by God. Okay. And then people say, well, people added their own stuff in there in places. And I'm pretty sure that happened. Paul would actually say, this is not revealed to me by God, but this is my opinion. And I think he stated that quite a few times. And then he would write down, like when he was writing to the different churches about problems, he would say, okay, this is what I feel about it. And then he would say what he felt about it. He would let you know, where he added stuff in his letter.
Hey, Heavy, would you agree with this statement that other than Jesus, Paul was probably the most influential Christian in the Bible?
I think so, because his writings, from what I understand, he wrote his writings, or supposedly his writings, some people say, were before the Gospels were written. If I understand correctly. Now, General could correct me on that. I wish he was in here because he would know for sure. But yeah,
no, Paul, that's true for the most part.
Yeah, Paul was very influential. Now think about Paul. whether he came before the Gospels or after the Gospels, he didn't mention details of Christ's life as in the Gospels. He didn't mention about the virgin birth. I don't think he didn't mention the actual crucifixion as we know it from the Gospels.
Well, he wouldn't have known about those because he was a contemporary of Jesus.
Well, he wouldn't have had firsthand knowledge of it.
Yeah.
But
Well,
apparently he didn't have any kind of revelation about it either.
Yeah, he still could
But
have
then
talk about
roadside
I think,
conversion though.
What?
He did have the roadside conversion, so I'm assuming that his experience was after Jesus
Yeah,
died because
it was all revelatory, right?
Yes,
And
because
growing up in Bethlehem and in Galilee was not part of the revelation.
Well, one thing I think
The ministry in Galilee.
Well, Paul's influence over Christianity, I think, stretches even because Paul was a Roman citizen, and being a Roman citizen, he had freedom of movement through the Roman Empire, and that allowed him to write these texts in different places and travel freely. We don't think if you were not a Roman citizen, you didn't have that same freedom. So it really was able to expand Christianity to what I think we know it as we know of it today.
Yeah, I would agree that he was very influential because, a lot of the stuff he wrote, he would write, like a book in the Bible that he wrote was directly to one specific church in a location in some, like in Ephesus or wherever. And he was talking to them about, y'all doing great and everything, but here's something y'all need to talk to y'all about.
and his purpose and intention was, in fact, to influence those churches.
And homogenize too. He was trying to homogenize the faith too, because everybody was kind of doing their own thing at the time. Some people didn't believe Jesus was God. Some didn't believe this, believe that. So he was trying to have like a standard text, and that's why I think he was doing all this.
Yeah, it's like even then you started getting splits into different denominations and all. Look at all the ones we have now. If they're talking about, the Bible is whether it's literal or not, the interpretation should be the same for everybody. But it's not. And you said, like, one group of people says, oh, we got the absolute knowledge. We know what these verses really, really mean.
Well, they're mostly just heretics, though.
Well, all of them are heretics to each other.
Well, there's the one true church. Sorry, Wayne.
Everybody,
but you get all these different divisions, even then. So people nowadays, like, say, if they had never known God or came to Christ or whatever, they would go, well, which one do I choose? Which one is closer to the truth, And then they would sit down and read the Bible and get some help on it. They might come up with a whole different interpretation from all the other 3,000 or 4,000 different ones out there. It's confusing.
Isn't it true that there are more denominations in the Bible? There are more Christian denominations than there are lines of scripture in the Bible? Something like that.
I mean, that's an unfair kind of analogy there, because like the differences sometimes are so inconsequential. Like they'll put the First Baptist Church of Louisville is a different denomination than the Second Baptist Church of Louisville. When really the doctrines and everything within those churches are the same. The doctrines really don't change. There's bigger differences between larger sects within that, but there's not like everything can be compartmentalized into nice, neat groups. So I wouldn't put them as like 10,000 different denominations saying that they have 10,000 completely different or contradictory views on something.
Well, it could be like one verse could cause a lot of contention. Maybe.
Yes, and I don't
baptism, where it might concern, do we speak in tongues or do we not? That's a big issue. There, it's like the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The Pentecostal and the Word churches, they're saying that you cannot be saved unless you were baptized in the Holy Spirit and speak in tongues and prophesy and all this stuff.
And they'll have
I mean, like a good example
support for that.
Yeah, like a good example of what I would consider like a notable change would be like there are some churches out there that take the ending of Mark. Wayne, you might have to correct me on this one. It's like Mark 16, 17. I think something like Mark 16, 17 or Mark 16, 18, somewhere around there. Anyway, there's a verse in there about handling poisonous snakes and you'll be able to drink their venom or whatever, stuff like that.
Poison.
Yeah. Anyway, there's some denominations of Christianity in the southern states that take that verse very literally. It becomes actually like almost a centerpiece of their church.
Yeah. Down here where I live, yeah.
Yeah, that's where you get those snake handlers. Yeah.
I see. The thing is, biblical scholars, if I could be correct, wrong on this, say that those couple of verses were added later about the snake handling and all. There, people have died in the churches or died not too long after coming from church because they was bit by a rattler. That's happened several times. You know, and yeah, see, that's a big thing there. You know, we're going to interpret it this way.
Let the natural selection work, man.
We'll do this when our pastor ends up dead.
So, you know, it's interesting because the Bible can be interpreted in so many different ways, but that's the power. But that's also its greatest failing, because you can interpret it to say whatever you want, but you know, by doing that, it really says nothing at the end. And that's why I kept going back to the fact that, hey, even if you believed Adam and Eve were real people or not, that really doesn't. I don't think that really has anything to do with your salvation if you're talking about Christian theology. But it seems like they were making the point that it somehow did, but they just, you know, went
Right, and that's such like that's a stumbling block for people, because like, what if you really don't see the evidence for Adam and Eve being historical figures? I mean, I don't think you have to. I don't really think it's necessary.
When I was in high school, this was before I went and started going to church seriously. When I was in high school, I was thinking about, okay, I accept evolution and all that. You know, dinosaurs, love dinosaurs, but I accepted evolution, that we did come from the egg, or we had common ancestors with chimpanzees and stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, now somehow God did this. I mean, he did what he had to do, but he also used evolution. And so this was kind of the way I was thinking. I'm trying to sort it out kind of in my head even back then, because I mean the evidence for evolution is overwhelming. I mean, people will say, "Oh no, it ain't," but oh good grief, yes it is. Even though they deny it. And then when I actually started seriously going to church in my early 20s, I still accepted evolution, and I still accepted Christ as my Savior. You know, I mean, I could balance that. The contradictions in the Bible, I balance that out too. You know, a lot of the reasons that people might leave the church or abandon their faith didn't really apply to me. I mean, I accepted evolution. I accepted contradictions. I accepted all the when God was ordering all these murders and stuff, or kill all these people in the Old Testament, because I looked at it like he would order people killed, or he would kill him. He would use his own power and do it for the greater good of mankind. And I looked at it that way. But anyway, oh gosh, it's too late.
I just figured the authors were mistaken in thinking that was ordered by God. That's the way I always looked at it.
Well, now I've heard that too, that they're trying to use God as a scapegoat to commit these atrocities. I've heard that.
Right. Right.
But then you get into the fact now that's not accurate.
Yeah.
That's not accurate. What else is not accurate?
Yeah.
So it goes right down the rabbit hole. So
yeah,
you got to accept that God made that. The one thing I think William Lane Craig does is that he just justifies. He says, "Well, hey, these people were evil and should have been killed. It should have been destroyed." And that is so, and it's so disgusting to hear someone like William Lane Craig, who's an educated person, say something like that, because he's really just justifying genocide. He's justifying genocide. They're saying these people deserve it because his gods killed them. That's crazy.
You know, it's funny. Somebody like William Lane Craig, he usually is somebody who takes the accommodationism approach, like myself. So you guys heard my position, like on the science and stuff like that. Like God accommodated with where these people were at, like the laws in the Bible. I don't believe they came from God. Like they obviously came from the cultures around them, because these laws weren't like anything new. These laws are, just stuff passed down from different cultures and etc. So as far as the wars and the atrocities, I don't think God told these people to do this stuff. That's the way life was back then. Now, it was the cultural norm for people to have war over land and territory. That's what people did.
But don't you run into problems then with biblical errancy? I mean, I'm trying to find like where you draw the line then with something like that.
Well, hold on. Well, one thing though, I gotta agree with Wayne, because if you're talking about how human existence was 2,000 years ago, it is very, like a lot of times we will look at those atrocities and say, well, hey, today we consider them to be atrocities, but if you think about it as the time of 2,000 years ago, you have nomadic people who they don't have, it's like when somebody commits a crime, you're not going to put them in a jail, because if you put them in a jail, then you got to take care of them, you got to feed them water, you have to do all this, you're taking resources, limited resources from the community to help somebody who committed murder or rape or something like that.
Right.
So
There was a time when justice was more swift.
yeah, so death was the justice, because you don't want to, doing something evil to take care of somebody just wasn't available. There was no jail system, there was no correction facilities, things happening. But as we evolved and as we start building these institutions, then we're able to house people and be more humane to our fellow man. And I think if you look at the Bible and the cultural context that it's in, then some of these things I wouldn't say are justified, but are practical for the time frame. Because again, if we're a nomadic tribe and food is very limited, I'm not going to go and now hunt for my own family and then hunt for some murderer that's killed like 5 people to help him stay alive. Let's just kill him and move on, because he's now become a detriment to the society. So I think
Right.
that's the context. You have to look at.
Justice systems have evolved over the ages. There was a time when punishment was just meant to shame you. I mean, that's what punishment was. If they weren't going to kill you, they weren't going to remove your hands, you wouldn't steal anymore. It was just to shame you, whether they, put you in stocks or chained you to something for a few days, and everybody knew then that you had done something wrong. You're being punished, and it was meant to shame you from doing it again, or so maybe banishment rather than death. Banishment was in some places considered worse than death.
Okay, y'all need to stop that. You're making too much sense. I never thought of it that way, though.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I phased out.
That's just the way it is.
I phased out there for a second. I was talking external chat there. So back to the question about errancy, though. Was that answered and I completely missed it?
No, I didn't answer. So,
okay, cool.
I would tell you the same people I tell the people with the science. Let the Bible, let the Bible say what the Bible says, and let the science say what the science says. Let the Bible say what the Bible says, and let the history say what the history and the culture says. I don't think it's necessary to try and justify all these wars and the different slavery acts and stuff like that in the Bible, because I don't think God was concerned with it. He accommodated with what these people knew and with their lifestyle and with their culture, and he wasn't necessarily trying to change the culture, but he used the culture to accomplish his overall goal. So he wasn't trying to go and change these people, their way of life or anything like that. What more or less what he did was he used that culture, he used the laws and etc. For the better good. Instead of God, taking somebody's free will and taking away these people, their culture and their identity, he more or less used it, which I think is more sophisticated.
Yeah, there was something that came up in I forget exactly where it is in the Bible, but they were questioning Christ about like laws in the Old Testament or something, or an incident happened, and by the Old Testament standard or whatever, we need to kill or stone or something, somebody. It was. I think it was something about divorce. Dang, my memory.
About the adulterous woman who was about to get stoned.
But what it boiled down to was, Christ was explaining why God gave this commandment, or said, do it this way, was because the Jewish people were very stubborn, which is apparent in the Old Testament. They were very stubborn, so God allowed them to do this. Oh gosh,
that doesn't make sense.
He was trying to explain some of the stuff in the Old Testament.
Oh, divorce. Yeah, he said it wasn't like this in the beginning, but because of the hardness of your hearts, God allowed this to happen. God let it be so.
Yeah, because they were so stubborn and wouldn't listen to him. Or something.
Yeah, but that's their choice. Remember, like this is the free will point. There is that he gave us free will so that we can do things to glorify God or whatever the argument is. I don't care. But the point is that he presented us that option. So why would he have to appease to the desires of men? because they're a certain way. I mean, shoot, he destroyed entire cities apparently because they were a certain way. So, like, why couldn't you just lay down the law? Listen, I am, I am a just God. I am a merciful God. I'm a wrathful God. Whatever. But this is what you guys are going to do. You have to do it this way. I did this idea where just like, well, I can't actually think of like, this image of God sitting back where just like, you know what, I'm going to let them do it because it's their culture. Okay. Yeah. I don't really agree with it, but you know how stubborn those Jews are. Like that's not that's not an argument.
Yeah. There was something else that we would talk about, like when Christ was born and his ministry, those last 3 years, and why and the crucifixion and all. There's something about, there is a verse that says that Christ was born at the right time in history, mankind's history, to start this, to add this revelation of forgiveness and a lot of the stuff that Christ was talking about, like when the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that was what it was. That God chose a specific time in history because he knew that this would be a pivotal point, where it would be the best time for Christ to manifest and to do his thing for those last 3 years. And I'm stumbling. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, it's fine, but it kind of latches onto my point of what I said before, where even God can even take control within all of the chaos and all of the randomness. He can accomplish his overall goal through the free will of his creation.
What's his goal?
Well, one of the overall goals will be redemption. So like I always say with the younger creationists who were just in the room, they say like, why was death involved and stuff like that. The overall goal would be one, redemption. And then of course there's like other ones, like, faith, stuff like that. But I would say the overall goal would be redemption.
Yeah, and then there was the thing about a progressing revelation of himself to mankind. And Christ was the last big revelation of God's real nature, if I recall correctly. Gosh, it's been a long time since I've thought about some of this stuff for a remake.
But yeah, I don't see a problem with like any of the like the cultural history and et cetera like that in the Bible, because I don't think that was the main objective of it. That's pretty much it. But then again, my whole view on morality is a little bit different anyway. So
yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Your view on the Old Testament, not the New Testament, just the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Do you view that as a set of God-inspired doctrines that one ought to follow, contained within that book, those books, or do you view it more as a man's view of a history of a people, like that the Bible exists more as a kind of an anthology to document the Jewish people from time of creation to where they are now?
I'm going to use a quote from N.T. Wright, and he basically said, the Old Testament is not how God saw the world, but it's how our religious ancestors view God.
That hits the nail on the head, because what I find interesting when you lay out the Old Testament ethic from early Genesis era days, like the time of Abraham, which would be early Ugaritic Sumerian context, the Egyptian context, down into the prophets like King David, onwards to Malachi, you have an elevation of human ethics toward what you could call a church-like way of looking at the world, a Christian way of looking at the world. And so I find it curious that Jeremiah comes on the scene. God through Jeremiah, if God exists, so he's speaking through Jeremiah, and he says that there's a new covenant. The day will come, and there's a new covenant that I will bring about that will totally neglect the old covenant, because it is faulty, because it is man-made, it is man-derived, and it'll come at the right time. And as Heavy was just saying, Jesus as Paul wrote, Jesus happened to be born at the right time, right place for the Christian ethic to spring up. If the Christian ethic sprung up any earlier or any later, it would not match, the events that happened in the right way.
Sorry, what do you mean it won't match the events in the right way? Can you expound on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So, for example, imagine the Christian ethic. Imagine Jesus before the Maccabees, before that revolt. How that happened, Alexander the Great, and so on, and then Antiochus Epiphanes. So, you could see it as a form of divine providence that, human history is such that God is patient to bring about key events to then move mankind a step forward, so to speak. So Jesus is born during the days of Herod, just when Jerusalem and the Israelites got back their land, so to speak, after the Maccabean revolt. And then the ethics associated with Roman religion and the way the Jews were at the time and all that. And then the church starts. Then you have Christian ethics deriving from that. And then how does Constantine, 300 years later, how does he accommodate that stuff? And on it goes. And then we have the Renaissance, which is like, 1,000 years later, being based technically on Christian virtues. And then you have the West that springs up from that. So there's too many coincidences. So I see it as the providence of God.
Yeah, but it also just sounds like the evolution of morality as a social construct.
I'm not denying that, and I think
that's cool.
Yeah. If there is a God, he's remarkably, like literally cutting with the cutting edge, so to speak. He's just a step ahead each time. Just survey the way, because what we do is when we read the Old Testament, we think it all happened at the same time. But, we're talking thousands of years of human history in the Old Testament as we read chronologically. And then it's just this remarkable turnover when, the Sermon on the Mount, that is the next, quantum leap in human ethical way of dealing with things. But Jesus gives a divine context in that regard.
Yeah, Fiona said something one time. Like a lot of people, the funnies or whatever, they'll say, well, Fiona never shares her faith. She does, and beautifully too, I might add. But she was talking about, even with all the different denominations, you have the Catholics against the Protestants, et cetera, and so on, that if you get some Catholics together with some Baptists or whatever other denominations, if you look at the core beliefs, that the main one is that Christ died for our sins, and that God wants to bring mankind into a proper relationship with Him because we fell away. And some other parts of that are like the basic and the most important core beliefs. And that you would find that even in all these different denominations and all that people can agree on. They may not agree on all this other doctrine and stuff in the Bible, but that they can agree on. And she felt that was one of the most important things of all to consider. When you have people believing other different things. And I wish I could remember exactly what she said, but it was something like that. Taryn all, well, like I used to be a Christian. I used to think about this stuff. I used to believe all this stuff. So because
I honestly, I don't know. That this might sound controversial to other Christians, but I honestly think that there are atheists or skeptics who may make the claim that they're not Christian, but I think that Jesus is bigger than that, and you'll be surprised.
Well,
so even though you may not make the declaration, I think he still has you.
Well, see, I say I'm an atheist, or I say I'm agnostic, or whatever. But I want to say agnostic because deep down inside, and I've felt this for years, even though I do not accept God is real now. But that deep down inside, if I it's like a hope or something that there really is a creator out there that really loves and cares for me. But there's nothing that convinces me of that. At one time I believed that. But because of certain things, I slowly drifted away from that. So, I say, well, I had the faith, but you hear so many Christians say, well, I know God exists and all this stuff. Well, see, that was me. I wanted to know deep down inside, not just faith. I wanted to really know He was there. And that never happened, and I just slowly drifted away. So as far as I'm concerned, there are no gods. That's why I take that view, because I can't just say, yes, there is one I believe in, I'm going to start going to church, because I'd be lying to myself. And if God was real, I'd be lying to Him too.
But heavy, don't you think it's just worth the risk? I mean, what have you got to lose, right? If there's no God, you have nothing to lose. But
that's being dishonest, though. That technically is.
I know.
Everybody loves Pascal's wager.
Yeah, yeah. If you say you love God and you go to church and you tithe and you're in the choir and going to Africa on missions and doing all this stuff, but you don't believe, you're lying. You're lying to yourself, and you're lying to, if God was real, you're lying to Him too. How much do you think He would appreciate that? If He was real.
Yeah, you see, when I make the declaration that I'm a Christian, it is, 90% of it is an intellectual choice because of the dry material. Just it's very dry. It is boring stuff to read through all the not only the theological stuff, but I connect the science to it. The so-called spiritual, emotional side of it would be the other 10%, and it is a personal experience. There is a genuine connection in that context, but the whole Jesus, like when Matt Slick says, "Oh, I had a personal revelation from Jesus." I don't know. I don't want to say that he didn't have, but I definitely didn't have that. I will say that I definitely did have what you could call like an inner voice, or like a silent little tug to do certain things, and like a changing of the heart, so to speak, that stuff. But I didn't see Jesus, face to face. So for me, for example, when I do physics, I get this excitement, this euphoria thing, as simple as, say, relativity. The mathematics that work in that. That same euphoria feeling takes over me when I look at the deep theological stuff. But I don't know. I sometimes tend to think that that's enough for me to then make the faith's declaration, even though I haven't yet experienced Jesus directly, like someone like Matt Slick. So maybe heavy, maybe to encourage you, maybe if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to have faith, I'm saying I've done it through an intellectual exercise, because there's enough evidence intellectually to go, have the faith. I mean, that could be the reason why you have faith. Well, because faith is having faith in things you can't be seen, that sort of thing.
Well, let me ask you a question, there, General. Can you try to explain to me the concept of a soul? Because I'll tell you right off the bat is that I don't reject that a God can exist. I don't start off with that as my premise or really even a conclusion. The question comes down to for me is through some nuances. Whatever, is there an afterlife? What happens once I leave this mortal coil? And from everything that I've gathered, everything that I know, everything I've seen, is that the idea of a soul, the notion of a soul, that makes no sense to me. The idea that this immaterial part of your mind can transcend and spend all of eternity in torment or bliss or whatever, depends on whatever your religion is. I find that incoherent. I find that doesn't make sense. I find that is a huge leap. So that even if the idea of a God is possible, it has no bearing. My belief in it or my worship of it has no bearing on this this world right now. So the only place it would have any type of bearing or any weight would be on an afterlife, which I don't believe is a possible thing. I don't think that there is an afterlife. So because of that, I reject the notions of like Christian theology as not just like incoherent or anything like that, but inconsequential to how I choose to live my life now. And for that reason, I don't do like the big in-depth study of faith there.
Right. Have you looked into John Eccles' work, the neuroscientist, Australian neuroscientist? He won the Nobel Prize on his research in the brain. He was one of the few who held to the mind-body dualistic nature of the brain, but he didn't argue it like the way Christians argue that it's some immaterial thing. He had to invent a term called a psychon, thing that exists in the synapse, but it operates through quantum tunneling. And the book he wrote was How the Self Controls Its Brain. So I think the so-called soul part of everyone is very, very physical. That it sort of borders on the whole, what's the other camp called again? Like there's the physical camp, the physical brain camp.
There's materialist, substance dualist. Monist and dualist, and then within monism is materialism.
So his model is what I see as biblical as well. It is a dualist model, but it is also bordering on the other model that is it's purely physical. Christians tend to dissect the supernatural from the physical as being this two totally different realms. I don't see that in scripture and in early Christian theology. I see the two realms as interlocked quite closely. To give you an ultimate example, the incarnation, the whole notion of the divine incarnating into the human body, you can't, that is probably the closest form of the two realms mixing. And I think that's the same with you and me, with whatever the soul aspect that you have and how that relates to the physical.
Well, I mean, you're obviously you're gonna have to give me some time to read up on that. I've never heard of a materialistic explanation for the soul before, so
yeah. So I'm gonna check
that out. But
I'll send you the link in the side chat.
Yeah, sure. Actually, if send it to the external chat because it disappears from here right off the bat, and if I don't bookmark it right away, I forget it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll take a read over, but I'd like to approach you with that question again. After I've read that, because I'm not confident that it can really. The idea of this consciousness now existing, even if we're going to label it as materialistic, it still has to be dependent on. I don't see how it gets past the problem that still has to be dependent on some type of material object, like a brain, like an actual physical thing that you can hold. So beyond that, like it's still kind of this like, okay, yeah, there's this consciousness, yeah, there's mind and there's body, but by the way, mind is also material as well. And I'm wondering whether that just moves a step, the goalpost back, but you still have now kind of a new dimension to kind of like a mind-body problem. How does this material mind now exist external of a material body?
I also recommend you check out this quite interesting and tongue-in-cheek podcast that has recently started. It's titled Peer Anormal because the word paranormal.
Yeah.
It's dedicated to are there any peer review academic journals or research conducted in regards to the paranormal? And that's its entire focus. So it's done 7 episodes, but they've done the most interesting one was the episode called Psychic Animals. A study was done on a dog that, and I don't know if anyone knows about this, but they did a study where this couple, they had a routine. Like they wake up in the morning, at a certain time. They go to they go to their jobs, and then they come back at a certain time. And so what they decided to do is they put a camera to investigate how the dog would move around the house while they are away from home during the day. The study was done for, I think, 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first 4 years, they noticed that the dog would locate itself throughout the house in a consistent pattern. It would, if it's turning around a certain wall, it would walk at a certain tile and then, take a left turn at a certain direction. Now, then they changed it up. They wanted to leave and arrive home early, would stay at the front door, because during the recordings they would notice that the dog would then wait for them at the exact time of arrival, just before the car pulls up on the road. So they would arrive, say, 3 hours earlier than expected, and the dog somehow knew. Then the icing on the cake of the study was they decided to randomly, without, obviously the dog doesn't know what they're doing, but just randomly choose to go on a trip, for the weekend, go away for 3 days. So they had a friend look after the dog. Now the dog did not go to the front door when the friend came to feed it, but the dog knew when they were arriving from this random trip. Like the dog was like doing its thing for 3 days, and then on the third day of arrival, before they even came on the street, moved itself to the front door, waited, and as usual, the dog was there. And so they dubbed the study as like a psychic dog, like a and so the question is, how the heck did the dog know this? And they're still baffled by it. So definitely check it out. I put it in the on-site chat.
And then there's the stories you hear about dogs that are left somewhere miles and miles and miles away by mistake, or something happens and they're 200 miles away or something. I'm just going to throw that number out there. And then one day, there he is at the door. Let me in. I'm hungry.
It's funny, like, because I think it's cool. And I mean, I have kind of like an anecdotal story that's similar to this. And when I was growing up, I had a dog, a Border Collie Lab Cross, a really smart dog. And he knew that he wasn't allowed to be on the sofa, in the living room. He knew he wasn't supposed to be up there. But what he would do is, whenever I was driving, whenever somebody was coming home, you unlock the front door, you open the door, and he'd be walking from the back of the house as if he was like back sleeping in his bed by the back door the entire time. Now the thing was that we had these huge bay windows in the front of the house. As you're driving down the street, you can clearly see the dog sleeping on the couch, lying on the couch. And then as soon as you got closer, he'd jump up and he'd run to the back door. And it was this, we always kind of joked around about it, that he knew he was doing something wrong, whatever. And we figured that what it was that he can look out the window, he can see the car, maybe that's it. So we lived in kind of a U-shaped street. So if we approach from the other direction, where he can't see down the road, would he still do the same thing? And he would. It just like the sixth sense. He knew that the car was coming down the road. And we made the same type of jokes, that psychic dog, all this other stuff. Then I was in a car accident, broke my car off, had to drive a rental for a couple of days, never did it. Whenever I'd drive home, I'd have to pull into the driveway before he'd figure out what was going on. He'd jump off and run back. And then what we figured out was, is this like he had good hearing. He recognized the sound of my car. He got used to it. Like the rattle that it had, like the loose muffler, whatever it was, he associated it. That all the cars go by, he recognized specifically what my car sounded like. And I think that something like that could be an explanation. It depends. For an experiment like that, what I'm trying to say is that there's too many controls to try to take into consideration. How would you go about falsifying this? How many different times do you have to test this?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's why the
it's
study was
still
done
it's still
over-
a cool story because it's still a cool story. And it might be like even if it's psychic animals, I wouldn't be surprised because honestly, like especially dogs, I love dogs. Yeah, I know the doctor loves dogs too.
Oh, I love those. Yeah.
And I don't think people give enough credit to how smart and clever that some dogs are. They have personalities.
I do just random strange dogs that because I work out at the local park to keep up my fitness for kendo, and that park is packed with people and their dogs. And sometimes I don't know if you know what kendo is, but it's a Japanese martial art.
Japanese martial arts based around sword fighting.
Exactly. So I take a bokken down, and so when I'm doing say push-ups or pull-ups, and I do laps around the oval, there's a particular dog, a Jack Russell, that's called Rocky, and he's nice and toned. He's like a tiny little, muscular Jack Russell. And he thinks it's a bone, so he just bites away at the sword, and I like that because it's like whenever I come home, I have little bite marks on the wooden sword. And
Shanae.
Oh yeah. There's a sense of aura that you can have with them, like they know that they're comfortable with you, even if they're strange dogs. It's like if I'm a stranger to them.
I never took kendo. I had a friend that took kendo. It looked really cool, like especially when you get up and like the full get up and everything. And I went out and actually watched him compete a couple times. It seemed really neat. But I remember I was making fun of him once. For using like the little bamboo swords, and like when you graduate to a real sword, like all those little jokes. And then he hit me with it once, and fuck, that hurt.
Well, you meant to hit by wearing the armor, like
yeah. You forget like those little bamboo swords. I mean, they're not little; they're actually what are they called? I think. Yeah.
At the park. So there's my Shanai.
Yeah.
There's yeah.
Yeah, those things hurt a lot.
Does that have like what looks like string or something going down the sides? Is it one?
Well, it's pieces of
these.
Yeah,
these here. Yeah, these are footy goalposts
or something.
Oh no, this. Yeah, these are slates, so they compress when you hit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you take they're like strips of bamboo that they bind together with string, and like really tight, and so it gives it like a little bit of flexibility, so that you can actually make contact with like another Shanai, and they won't crack, they won't break, but it makes them, they're still really rigid, but they have a little bit of give to them, so that they won't crack when you smash them up against each other.
Right.
Yeah, Christopher says in the chat, it hurt, but not as much as a real sword. It's like, yeah, obviously, but it's misleading, like being hit with any piece of bamboo.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's it. Just
no. I was going to say, like, back in the day. Of course, y'all remember Bruce Lee and how bad he was, and he would get those nunchucks and he'd start spinning them. Well. I would make some, I'd make some, and try to do it. And I got to where I could spin them pretty good. I could come forward, go up under here, and catch them. They come up past my back of my head, and I'd catch them here and do stuff like that. But if I had to fight with them, ain't no way I wouldn't know what to do. But I could spin them things. It was kind of like, you learn how to spin a baton, or spin the nunchucks. It's just kind of a different thing. You get used to it being flexible. But those were fun though. Until you sort of forget where they're at and where you're going, because I've got a knot up in here somewhere from that. They were good for your forearms too, though. Strengthening your forearms.
What was the conversation we were having before the people even left? Oh. I'm still thinking, General, your favorite topic came up, death before sin. Like, you're like a master at talking about that. We were talking about that for a minute.
when did that happen?
This happened. This was like what, an hour ago, right?
Yeah, the conversation started off pretty good. Then stuff happened, and anybody.
Who brought it up though? Like why was it discussed?
No, actually, Antonio and I were talking about this yesterday, and so he decided that he wanted to follow through with the conversation some more again today or tonight. But it didn't work out. Things happened. So.
Oh, yeah, that was one of the things I caught. You know, like I saw the Hangout, the start of the Hangout last night, but I was so tired and sleepy. And then when I woke up this morning, I watched some more of it. And I saw that about, was there death before the fall? And me, I want to say yes. You know, the animals could have been eating each other, you know, in the Garden of Eden. And then there's about the tree of life, you know, when you look at it. It says like Adam and Eve were not created immortal. Why else would the tree of life be there?
That's really weird.
Yeah. When you think about it like that, because God said that, you know, something about He's going to kick them out of the garden, you know, lest they eat of the tree of life and live forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So when you look at it like that, they were not created immortal. If the fall had never happened, and they had all their kids and stuff, death would probably be maybe a natural cause or something, or your body just wearing down from old age.
Right.
I mean, you're most likely no diseases or anything like that, but you know, eventually your body wears out and you die. But in that situation, if there was no fall, you know, people would not be afraid of it. You know, because at that time, because it says that God walked with Adam in the cool of the day or something. You know, or that may have been figurative, but the way it's described in Genesis is that whether you could say it was just Adam or you could say mankind in general, that God had a very close special relationship with us, our ancestors or something. And then something happened. And that separated us from God. And so you can look at the whole thing, the revelation of God in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, is Him trying to bring mankind back to Himself.
But Heavy has just said exactly what I said in my Noah Flood lecture that I uploaded. Yeah, like I recommend you watch it because I have been researching this for about 5 years now, trying to locate the God of Eden.
Well, I didn't research anything. It was just I'm just kind of looking at it, you know.
I mean, yeah. So just in a nutshell, Genesis 1 is very generic. It says humans plural, and they're multiplying, they're filling the earth, they're subduing the earth. So obviously, you know, you have babies being made and so on. Then Genesis 2 narrows down on a specific location that God chooses to now dwell with, you know, with the humans, and that's in the Persian Gulf area. There's the 4 rivers being mentioned, and so you can pinpoint. By the way, in the last Holocene period, this Persian Gulf was dry, so the Garden of Eden would be in this locality over here. And then the death spoken of is spiritual deaths because it's a qualifier. It's Tahmuts. So, yeah, when the fall took place, God can't be within the location of where sin is. So there's this casting out language, and it's the same language used for Israel. When God again tabernacles with the Israelites, just like He tabernacles here with Adam and Eve and the other humans, what happens to Israel when they sin? They're exiled until again God finds a way for reconciliation. So, yeah, there's no change in the laws of physics during the fall. It doesn't mention that.
Yeah, and that's why I like to think that, you know, lions were eating the lambs. You know, all this stuff, nature was going on like intended. You know,
and that's Psalm 104. David in Psalm 104 is commentating on Genesis 1, and in Psalm 104 he says that the lions look for food from God, or they receive their food from God. And if God, it says in the Psalm, if God removes His favor, they are discouraged and they die and turn to dust. But if God returns His favor, the earth is replenished. So look at natural history of Earth for the last 4 billion years. You have extinction events, 10 different extinction events. Whenever an extinction event takes place, immediately there's this replenishing of life in a different form. Completely destroys the young Earth model, because the young Earth model denies, 4 billion years of extinction events.
Yeah, like I said earlier,
is saying that in Genesis 1 there is death.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Like I said earlier, in high school, I was already running all this through my mind before I started going to church seriously. I didn't start going until maybe mid-20s. I was still in high school trying to sort this stuff out, and that's it was something though. It's kind of like when you look at evolution and the natural processes and how the universe works, or that we understand so far. It's like back then when I was, figuring this stuff out and going to church, it was like, wow, look at what God did. He set everything in motion and it works, and that's like Fiona, she'll talk about when she's doing her microbiology stuff, that she's looking in the microscopes and seeing all this incredible detail and learning all this stuff and doing these experiments, that she sees the hand of God there. What she says, she sees the hand of God there, his brilliance, in the creation. And from what I understand, a lot of the scientists that are Christian are like that. Even if they're studying evolution or cosmology or whatever, they're like, wow,
But you see, Heavy, that's what I meant earlier about that euphoric intellectual reasons for having faith, where that's why I have faith, is because of stuff like that. It's that the so-called spiritual, emotional, subjective experiences of the direct revelation of Jesus, that I've yet to fully experience. I know I have experienced what you could call like a tug, like an inner tug to do certain things. And then, when that event takes place, then, yep, that's God's providence and that. But I've yet to have a full, spiritual experience, let's just put it that way. I have to be honest. Like, I can't lie and say, hey, you can't, you just have to believe me, take my word for it. No, I haven't had that experience yet.
Oh, anyway, guys, everybody's going to sleep here tonight. I got to take off because they're not going to let me sit on the computer and talk, apparently. Family.
Oh.
All right. Whose Hangout is this, by the way?
It's Wayne's. Yeah, I'm gonna read over that stuff there, the general, and I'd like to talk to you more about that afterwards. Okay?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
All right, cool. Talk to you guys later.
All right, see you, Simon.
Yeah, what gets me is sometimes I'll share with some people about what I used to believe, or that I used to be a Christian. I said, oh, you weren't a true Christian. You didn't do X, Y, and Z in this proper order or something, or you would never fall in the way if you were a true Christian. I'm like, say what? Because sometimes when I talk, like we've been talking tonight, I was kind of going back to, it's like I put on my Sunday go to meeting hat, and then I'm in church again.
Right.
We're talking about stuff.
Oh, did you see the G-Man challenge that he gave me? General Han Solo, I challenge you. It's his latest video. He spends about 30 minutes say how wrong I am for calling him a non-Christian, and then I find it quite intriguing that he provides a quote-unquote Christ-like attitude in saying, if I were to accept his debate for because he wants a debate on whether he's a Christian or not, like for me to prove it.
It's actually rather funny with G-Man. Then they go through this before with like Thick Shades, where Thick Shades, yes, he accepted Jesus was his Lord, but he accepted Jesus was his Savior, but not his Lord. He wasn't behaving as if he had to adhere to Jesus's commands or his teachings or anything.
Yeah, I find it interesting that he, in the midst of this debate challenge, he says, oh, and I can't, to paraphrase, but an accurate paraphrase of what he said, I can't wait to have you in a body bag. Like he literally says, you better be prepared to bring a body bag with you. And I'm thinking to myself, but that's my point, G-Man. That is not a Christ-like attitude.
He was speaking figuratively.
Yeah. Even if you speak figuratively, G-Man, you don't use that language. You don't. It's not about trying to win, even to the point of like literally killing someone. That's why I challenged him in the Fiona context, where I asked him, "Have you won the respect of outsiders? Have you provided a character, your character to resemble Jesus in your discussions with Fiona and so on, in your disagreements?" And the answer is no. Demonstrated that Christ-like faith, therefore, that you're not a Christian. So he then, now, if he responded back in a genuine, for asking me to recant and say, look, this is the nature of things. If he said it in a Christ-like manner in that video that he just made, then I would go, yep, no, G-Man has a point. But it just confirmed my assertion. The way he, go and check it out. For 30 minutes, he speaks like, I hate to say this, like a ISIS type person. There's a lot of death type analogies, hurting type analogies, like wanting to prove himself. That is not a Christ-like attitude. It's not.
Well, you could kind of look at it like, I'm being very generous here. You know how wrestlers do with each other. Talk about how bad they're gonna hurt each other and this and that.
Yes.
And that's kind of like G-Man. That's kind of like what I get from G-Man sometimes. He's doing this big bravado stuff or something. Real macho stuff. I'm gonna whoop you. Whoop you like I'm gonna hit you so hard your grandma will feel it. Stuff like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He'll be saying things kind of like the wrestlers do, I think. Because some things have been coming up lately, like these cartoons or memes that some of us have come up with, especially me. I got called out on it, but they don't mean no harm. And so I'm looking at that. Got me to thinking when we had that discussion.
Oh, I know.
When we had that discussion last night or night before last with Antonio, and it's like it's just kind of in fun, the stuff we're doing. We're not doing it out of spite. So that got me to thinking. G-Man and some of his stuff maybe just it's kind of maybe his sense of humor coming across, or he's not doing it for spite. Now I can't say because with G-Man it's hard to say what his intention is from one moment to the next.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that because I would definitely agree with you that that's probably how he's seeing it, like a WWE sort of. It's not real. It's just one of those. That's just present his
it's hard.
defense, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I had mentioned that in that hangout that if some of them are being funny or whatever, we can't tell because even though we see these people.
But how all I quickly say is this: how old is G-Man? Isn't he 40 something?
I think so.
G-Man in his 40s.
I think he is. Now I could be wrong.
So
30s maybe, but he's not really young. He's in. Apparently he's in great shape though because he does running and stuff and whatever. But yeah, like I said, in our community, we can
because I'm 28.
Oh, okay.
He's 40 something. It's interesting that a young self is more mature than an adult. Technically, I'm an adult. I'm 28, but I'm younger than him.
And you'll be like a young adult, right?
Yeah, I'm a young adult,
I would be younger than I'm 22.
Wayne is even younger than me. He's like 21, 22. And yet Wayne and Wyatt's even younger than Wayne. Yeah, Wyatt is 20. And these guys are more mature than G-Man. G-Man's got like double their age. And he still acts like a little child.
Yeah,
it's sad. Honestly,
I guess.
Well, let's not talk about.
I'm sorry, G-Man. I'm sorry to shock you, but sometimes you need to be shocked and told. But you need to you need to grow up.
Yeah, Wayne made a good point there, though. But what was some of the other stuff y'all went over in that about the Genesis hangout? I wish I could remember certain points that I was listening to.
Oh, in the beginning, right? Yeah, the conversation was getting really good too. Oh man, but what else were we? Oh, when you accept evolution or when you accept natural science, you have to choose between literalism or the science, or I guess not even biblical literalism. That's a terrible word. Between younger creationism and science, because it's really younger creationism. You could take the Bible literally and consistently, like Hugh Ross. Hugh Ross is a biblical literist, but he doesn't deny the science.
I think what they mean by biblical literalism is their interpretation of it, though.
Yeah. Like I remember when I first accepted older creationism. People are like, oh, well, that just means you don't believe the Bible. And I'm like, no, I believe the Bible. I just don't believe you.
Yeah, that was kind of why I brought that thing up about the basic core belief. It's faith in Christ. And all the rest of it, well, it's not all that. When you look at it, it's not that important. Whether you believe Genesis is literal or not, that really doesn't touch that core belief that you have. I keep going back to that, but it seemed like that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, no, yeah, you're right. Like, so
sorry,
that's
you broke up. What did you say?
Oh, I was talking about, whether or not, like say you're Christian, whether or not you accept Genesis as literal or not, it really doesn't matter when you come down to what your core belief is in Christ.
Right. That's why I said I can see it going either way.
Yeah. But some people say, if you don't believe Genesis is literal, you're not a Christian. That doesn't have anything to do with that core belief or that relationship or faith you have in Christ.
Yeah,
well, I guess I would ask, what do you mean by literal? When people say literal, that's why I say no. I think it's historical, but I don't think it's scientific. Like I don't think Genesis is supposed to be a science textbook.
But
what they take it to mean is plain reading is true, basically.
The plain English reading.
Yeah.
But when you read read Genesis in the King James version, it just sounds so majestic. It really does.
That alone should convert everyone to be a Christian. The majesty of the English.
Speaking of Genesis, what's a really good video to go alongside the Genesis passage? I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but General, it's on your channel. You know what I'm talking about, the Noah intro.
When Noah in the film, when he describes Genesis with an animation.
Yes, and guess what, General? It shows theistic evolution. Bam.
That is like the perfect 3 minutes. When I saw that in the cinema, I was going, why are Christians hating? This is literally what Hugh Ross teaches, and other evolutionary Christians teach. That chronology, it's perfect. The interesting thing about that movie is when you see Adam and Eve having that glow at the end of the sequence, that is actually derived from the Apocrypha, from the Book of Enoch. So the film derived from Second Temple Judaism, with that glow-like clothing nature of Adam and Eve, which obviously I don't believe that was the case, but I find it interesting that the Genesis 1 narrative, and then included Enochian elements at the end of the sequence.
Speaking of which, remember I already told you this, General. I think maybe. You know my flood model, because me and you, you know, it's funny. General and I, we both believed the flood was local, but like I guess for like the reasons why the flood happened or whatnot, or like the type of events that were going on, I don't think we agree on that or something like that, or because I have an explanation revising it. Like I'm still like changing what I think about what might have happened, but one of my predictions were confirmed, because remember I told you, General. So basically I had basically and I put this in the Great Debate community on their page. In my flood model, I basically posit that if you read Genesis chapter 6, right, that's where this begins at, right? Chapter 6 of Genesis, where it talks about the sons of God coming down and they father children. Most Christians, especially like the younger variety, they'll argue that when these angels came down and they intermingled with women, they did give birth to actual literal giants of what we would consider to be, gigantors like Shaq, right? Or like Yao Ming. Those are like really tall people, 7 foot, 8 foot tall people. And so like as a matter of fact, Arcane, I think he may hold to this belief where he thinks that there were actual literal giants walking around on the planet. Now my view is a little bit different, because I don't think I do believe, but at the same time they weren't giants to you and I, because where General and I put the flood at is, well, General, you would say the flood happened around like 45,000 to 50,000 years ago, like myself, right?
Actually, when I was making that study, let me just bring up my slides. I think the flood happened 13,000 years ago.
13,000?
Yeah, 13,000.
I'm more inclined. I like Hugh Ross's model, which is around like 45 to 50. But it's because he like takes into account like the ending of the ice age and etc. like that. And so like that's his mechanism for how it could have happened. But basically, my
just if you can present me, I won't take too long in this.
I'm about to do it right now.
But so here's an animation. I'll just share my screen. So in the I don't know if this is this coming up? No, I'll have to reopen that one sec.
Yeah,
in the late 90s, people were researching on the last Holocene period of the Persian Gulf flooding, and they would say that it took place over 1,000 years. It started in. So here's the animation. So initially, 15,000 years ago would be the end of the last ice age, and this entire Persian Gulf area is dry. I'm making the point that Eden, the Garden of Eden, is around here. And so 15,000 years ago, when the ice caps start to melt and the sea levels rise and so on.
Oh, yeah, so why so early, like in comparison to my model, where I say, Adam and Eve probably lived 50,000 years ago, flood 45,000 years ago, Tower of Babel 30,000 years ago. Why? Like,
yeah, I would say that the natural timing is too. So 40,000 years ago is still too early. So and I'll show you. So 20,000 years ago, you have, so this is the Hijaz Mountains, and here you have the Armenian Mountains up here, and Ararat is up here. So this region here is low-lying. So it's about 500 meters and a kilometer below these areas here. So not only do you have mountains in Europe and in the Asian continent, like India, Himalayas, and the American continents, that you have water, ice caps melting. So the animation shows that, see, it takes nearly 5,000 years for this entire region to flood. But a recent study in 2015 showed that this wasn't gradual, it was sudden. And it flooded actually up to the north part over here, which is where the text says where the ark lands, which is up here. This would have been 13,000 years ago, not 40,000 years ago, I don't think.
If you like me, I do like a comparison between your model and Hugh Ross's. I like his model, but if it's wrong, I'll change my mind.
Where are y'all?
Yeah, so here's a quick.
Where are y'all?
Just go to the photo.
30,000 years instead of 3,000.
So in Hugh Ross's model, as a matter of fact, I can even show you the Ice Age timeline, like, like a couple, 100,000 years, the Earth goes through Ice Age cycles. And so I think the last Ice Age cycle was around 40 to 50,000 years ago.
Yeah, but the last Ice Age would be the Pleistocene and Holocene period. So you're talking 100,000 years. Okay, so humans migrate out of Africa. They let me just go to the African map. Here. So they migrate out of Africa, the out of African model, to around 100,000 years ago, and that is again documented with all these peer-reviewed articles.
Right.
The human that are settled here in the Persian Gulf, they then start to migrate after a flooding that happened around 20,000 years ago. So I'm saying that the flooding is coinciding with what's mentioned in Genesis, because that's the only timing, because of geographical, you're having a rise in temperature, you're having the rise in sea levels, the mountain caps melting down. It could not have happened 40,000 years. That's too early. That's still too dry. It's still too cold. The sea levels are still too low. So the only time it can happen is about between 20 and 15,000 years. So I'm saying 13, and this is the extent of the flooding that could have happened. And this picture on the right is like today. So yeah, and the ark rests just up here, if you can see my mouse, which is Mount Judy. So Mount Ararat is still much further north, but the text doesn't say that the ark came on Ararat, because recent evidence shows that the phrase Ararat technically is a corruption. It's a corrupted form of the original Hurarat, Uratu.
The what?
Uratu. Yeah, Hurarat, which is Uratu, and Uratu is Mount Judy, which is much further south near Iraq. So Mount Ararat would be up here, whereas the Armenian Mountains, which is much further south, which is where Uratu is, would be where the ark, where it's still low lying. It's not high enough. If the water reached Ararat, this entire region would have to be flooded, because the Ararat Mountains are much taller. So, but if you're speaking of Uratu, then you're speaking of a low-lying region that extends up to here, and it fits quite nicely. So that's my flood model thus far. Now the Nephilim thing, I still think it's a divine intervention. I do think that angels, and so I don't think there's a Neanderthal connection still. I know you're wanting to make a connection with Neanderthals, but I genuinely think that.
I was actually rethinking that today, but so I have evidence where right now I can make the predictions and it could go either way. So let me explain. So at first I had let me try and think of a mechanism or a process to try and explain how these angels possibly could have impregnated these women, because we know it's not an everyday occurrence that angels come down and impregnate people. So if your girlfriend ever says I was touched by an angel, she needs medicine.
Well, Paul was thinking the same thing in the Corinthian letter, but you have to have a head covering because of the angels. So
Yes,
you know,
that's weird, right? You're gonna start lust after you and stuff like that. Like, oh Lord.
Yeah.
But what I had said was maybe it could be possible that you see. All right. Before I go into that, let me go into just like basic geometry. Jenny, you know about this, like Euclidean geometry and etc. When Christ descended into a human body, or when Christ was incarnated he incarnated himself from whatever dimension he was at into a three-dimensional presence.
Yeah, he emptied himself. Yeah.
Right. And so I actually have the equation I had written out. That'll take too much time. But long story short, if we ever found out what dimension Christ was in before he descended into his human three-dimensional form, we could mathematically describe the incarnation. If we ever find out what dimension God is in or was in, Jesus. So in the same sense, you could also mathematically describe how angels descended from their hyper state, dealing with hyper dimensions, right? Anything past 3+ dimensions. So I was thinking, though my model is weird, where I say, it's possible that these angels could have descended and transformed themselves into human bodies, right? People are like, well, how could an angel transform into a human? But in the same sense, it's just as crazy to believe that God transformed himself into a human. So I mean, they're both like crazy ideas.
Well, the thing is about Christ, if you look at it, he developed. I mean, when he began to develop in Mary's womb, he started out, here's 1 cell, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, 16, normal embryonic development. But for an angel to come down and manifest a physical body, now that's kind of a different thing. It's like poof, ooh, I got flesh. Wow.
Well, I'm gonna make Wayne's mouth salivate now.
Wait, let me just finish my last
I am
point.
totally going to quote mine that for later and put that into a soundboard.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about he almost spit his ice cream out. Or,
Okay, finish your point, and then I'll show you what. Oh, this may help you more.
So I have 2 liable options to choose from right now, or at least until I come up with something better. Either because around the same time period I placed the flood, humans and Neanderthals were interbreeding. And so I made up a really complicated hypothesis about maybe it could be possible that these angels transformed into Neanderthals, and this is absolutely crazy. It's going to sound crazy. The angels transformed into Neanderthals, but because these ancient people were ancient people, they didn't have the word Neanderthal. These were just average humans. These were just really short humans, right? And so these angels transform into Neanderthals. They intermingle with these beautiful women, and hybrid vigor takes place, where now you have this mechanism where tall humans can come about through populations. And boom, you have the Nephilim, who aren't actually giants. They're just other humans who are really tall.
Of course, Neanderthals are short.
But right. And so, yeah, that's why I'm thinking. That's another reason why the model wouldn't necessarily work. Or you could just say, scratch that part. You don't really need a process to explain how an angel, could transform himself into a human. I don't know. Just
could it
let that fly out the window.
Could it have been just a story?
Yeah, it could have been a metaphor. I'm willing to concede. I'm just exploring different possibilities right now. But another model is maybe the angel just came down, they made it with the woman, and bam, you have your 6 foot tall people. But what I wanted to show you guys is today, as I was scrolling down Facebook, I'm subscribed to like different science pages, and there's actually a study that came out where now we know, and I just clicked on the link, for a fact that there really were 6 foot tall humans 45 to 50,000 years ago. Like I've been saying. Even I didn't know this, but I just figured. Hold on, here we go. This is the article I had found. So it says hold on. All right, here we go. The tallest men in the world trace back to.
Yeah, you have to present yourself, Wayne.
Am I presenting? Yeah, I am. Oh,
No,
okay,
no.
okay.
I'm sure.
Hold on.
And then after this, I want to show you something that will make you flip a table.
Yeah, I might change my mind completely on this because I don't know. I'm just looking at different possibilities right now.
Well, if you're looking at different possibilities, I
No,
linked something there in the side chat for you
that will support you.
Read over.
Yeah, I was gonna throw something in real quick. Like even nowadays, different people, people can be, vastly different heights, and it can also do with their heredity or whatever. Like I saw this one guy, he was like well over 6 foot, and then standing beside him was this little short Asian lady. Was in a restaurant, Chinese restaurant rather, or Asian restaurant, and she barely came up to his belly button. So for her, that was definitely a giant, because he's like 2 or 3 feet taller than her,
But yeah, this is the article that I had seen or I had saw this morning. Come on, computer. Here we go. And if you keep on going down, here you go. If you keep on scrolling down, it talks about men from I can't even pronounce this, Bosnia and
Bosnia,
the Netherlands. Blah blah blah. On average, the tallest in the world, according to new research that helps to explain why such individuals often grow to 6 feet and more in height. And then it says the statue appears to be at least partly a genetic legacy of the Upper Paleolithic Gravitian culture, says the study. And keep on going down.
Now, look at the date, Wayne. Look at the date given. See how that fits what I've been saying, 50 and 10,000?
Yeah, 50,000, 10,000 years ago, yeah.
So I would say Adam and Eve is, say, 70,000, and then the whole Nephilim thing was between that era, and then the flood takes place 30,000 years ago.
And then it says, remains of these men suggest that they stood between 5 foot 10 inches and 6 foot 2 inches on average. And what have I been saying? Which was an extraordinary size for the time. So if these giants really did exist, they were only tall compared to like the other average people they lived around. So they weren't literal giants like we think of, like 9 foot tall, 10 foot tall people. It's just that they were tall for their day.
Right.
Yeah, and maybe someone came up with this thing about saying that angels came down and caused these giants. They were just trying to find a way to say,
exactly.
Well, big,
right.
They're tall.
Right. So Wayne, when you use the word transform, this is from a Second Temple text. It's dated to 2nd century BC. For it was thus that they the women charmed the watchers. The watchers would be these angels who were before the flood. As they continued looking at the women, they were filled with desire for them and perpetrated the act in their minds. Then they were transformed into human males. So if you're talking about that, trying to give the analogy of the incarnation, where you have a change or something, then yeah, they were transformed into human males, and they had sex, and then they produced the giants. Now, when you go to Jude, let me just bring it up. There's a very rare word that's used in the New Testament. It's only used twice in the New Testament. One time it occurs in Jude. It says, now Jude is referring back to the text I just read to you, so Second Temple literature stuff. God, in this case Jesus, also held in the eternal chains those angels who did not keep their own position, but abandoned their assigned place. The Greek word for position, their own position, and their assigned place, would be lecturing about that dimensional realm. Do you know what Greek word is used for that? Oikoterion. Here's the word. And oikoterion is used, guess one more time, and guess where it's used? In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 2. And look at what Paul says. We know that if the earthly tent, the human body we live in, is torn down, we have a building in heaven that comes from God, an eternal house not built by human hands. Is that the word is used. For in this one we sigh, in this human body we sigh, since we long to put on our oikoterion, heavenly dwelling. Now, what's the heavenly dwelling? Well, what's the heavenly body, the resurrection body? Well, it's something like Jesus. But did the body of Jesus, was it some immaterial thing? Well, no, it was something physical. So you are on the right track, is what I'm saying, because of this one word that's used 2 times, both for the angels who sinned and for the future same type of body that Christians will have in the resurrection. So you were definitely on the right track with that one. Just wanted to point that out.
I'm still
salivating.
Yeah, I'm still processing this. I'm still thinking on this.
So you know when you're saying that they're in a certain dimensional context, well, that heavenly dwelling. So it's like the angels leave that assigned place, and then we fill in that spot in Christ. So if you can then relate that to the the Genesis 6 narrative and what that meant.
I'm just going to kind of throw something out there. Would that be like, okay, here you have the angels in their place, doing their thing. But when they come into our realm or reality, it's like an instant thing. It's like a thing where they can only exist on this here by changing or something.
Well, have you seen Interstellar? The movie Interstellar. In Interstellar, when Cooper goes into the Tesseract black hole and he interacts with his daughter through a dimensional means by gravity, like physically interacting with her with her watch.
Yeah,
when he's in the fourth dimension and tinkering with things.
Yeah, so from their perspective, they thought they were speaking with a ghost. They didn't realize it's an actual physical entity, which is Cooper himself, physically interacting with the gravitational reality of their perspective. It's just the only difference was Cooper was in a high dimensional plane. But that's my point. There's no distinction between the supernatural and the natural. It is a blend of the two. It's just that what appears to us as supernatural is just another high dimensional reality.
So that sounds like panpsychism.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's a good word.
I mean, my cross photo is a testament to that, trans-dimensional nature of Jesus.
Huh. I might have something saved somewhere for you then to look over. Take me a while to find it, though. But I think it relates to the incompatibility of Christianity and panpsychism.
If no one knows what that is, maybe you can elaborate.
Yeah, the easiest way of putting it is, I'm sure everyone in the room understands what pantheism is. Yep, heavy nods. Yep. All right. Panpsychism takes it a step further, where you could say that reality is all there is. Like all physical reality is a part of God, plus something in addition would make God.
Pretty much, yeah.
Basically, pantheism plus one.
Heavy's reaction.
Just Heavy, like, oh, fuck sakes.
How do you spell that? Could you put it in the side there? I just look it up.
I'll type it up for you.
Yeah. I can do a little more in-depth reading.
So, General, do you think the General 6 narrative with the fallen angels, what if it was just a thing where maybe they just didn't know like how these tall people came about, and they said, oh, maybe the angels did it, right? Because it's funny, you do see this same story about these fallen angels and like all these other different like mythos, right? Like
you see that would be my response. You could then suggest it like, oh, they didn't know where lightning came from, so they thought it was like Zeus or something, and then you can. But what that would mean is the entire narrative in Genesis and elsewhere is nothing but a faulty man-made, to account for these tall giants, and therefore any association with angels or the divine or whatever just goes out the window. Then I would respond back and say, well, why would Jude, Peter, Jesus himself contemplate the reality of such beings, especially in the ministry of Jesus, because he went to certain geographical locations in his ministry. The locations were associated with the Nephilim, and according to the Genesis, and also when the Israelites had to root out certain tribes under Joshua, those were Nephilim tribes. So if it was a misunderstanding, conjured up this false story of angels and so on. Not only did Israel commit genocide, but the whole ministry of Jesus is based on a myth, a faulty myth that never happened. So either that's the case, or it did happen, obviously through a more rational perspective, if you're talking dimensions here, and therefore Jesus' ministry is true.
So how could, because I know we've been reconciling with everything else with like science and theology and etc. So like I've been trying my best to do it, and like we're doing what Penn and Taylor do with magic. You know how they kind of like demystify magic and stuff like that and explain how it was done. Like you and I, like we usually are the ones who like we explain to people like how the miracles were done. Like, oh no, like all Jesus did, was X, Y, and Z with the particles, and bam, you got water and the wine. So like
changing water into wine. Again, when I was telling Beckel and True Prism G-Man, I don't know if you guys saw that, when I was like, no, water did not change into wine. Because if you're talking about H2O, it doesn't change into wine. But the water in the jars weren't just H2O. You have a lot of other organic, material that derive, because don't forget, where's the wedding located at? Where's the geographical location of the wedding? The water in Cana had a lot of other materials that Jesus, using more, it was a divine, but he just rearranged the molecules to fit a more fermented wine-like substance. And it's a way, and that would fit the hypernatural context, not the supernatural context.
Right, but the whole thing. So like even like, all right, so the best I can do with the Genesis 6 narrative is I can when it comes to like the angel transforming into like humans, I can kind of describe that geometrically, like how they went from a higher dimensional state to a lower dimensional state. But the actual biological process of how this happened, I'm still kind of fuzzy on. So we
have you're a step closer because of that Greek word oikoterion, that dimensional discussion we just had. Now the next step is, I guess, to investigate the means of the biological stuff, and that's even a question I'm still wrestling with.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? But I'm on the right path with the word the Orchitarian, or even like the paper I just found out today, because everybody they've been telling me I've been wrong, because we know that there weren't any 6 foot tall people 45 to 50,000 years ago. And I said, who knows? Maybe in the future we might find like bones or something like that. And like just to see that, I'm scrolling down on my timeline, and they're like, oh yeah, like we just found out that there were some 6 foot tall people in the Near East. That was pretty awesome, because everybody has been telling me that I'm crazy.
You're not crazy.
Another thing to look at, and y'all probably talked about it, is that the height of a human being, there is a limit, like you can only be just so tall. Like, say, look at some people that are like 7 or more feet. There are people that are that tall, or maybe even taller. But look at the problems they have with their legs and their back and stuff. Our bodies,
yeah, exactly,
are not made or adapted or whatever to be that tall. It's like we have a certain limit, a certain range that our physical body can be, a certain size before issues like that happen. It's kind of like when I look at like some of the bigger dogs, like Saint Bernards. They have a lot of hip problems in the breeding of the dogs. Like, to get a Saint Bernard, we got the size, but the internal parts are not adapted, or they didn't think about the bones, the hip sockets. How much stress can they take? Those weren't. No, those didn't adapt to support the extra weight. If I'm making sense,
You're talking about hip dysplasia.
It's like saying you have this certain material and you can build buildings up to 20 feet tall. I'm just an example. But if you go 30 feet tall, the building's going to fall down under its own weight. So you could kind of look at it that way. Yeah, we got something bigger, but the underlying structure can't support it. So same with humans, we get to a certain height, whether it's a freak of nature or just a mutation or something. Our body physically cannot support that extra size.
Wayne, just quickly, did I share with you a public post I put on Heiser's blog about this very topic and his response to it?
No. Oh my gosh! He didn't respond to the last email, because he can't do our interview that was supposed to be coming up. He's flying somewhere or something like that.
Okay. Now, if you can keep in touch with him on that, yeah.
Yeah, we got to reschedule.
But
who I talked to a couple days ago? Heroes. We talked about Interstellar. He liked it. He said the physics in it was fairly good.
Oh, really? Okay. I think Hugh Ross, he needs to see the model that we have, because we provide concordism in light of evolution, and it fits perfectly. I don't get it. I don't understand why he just neglects it. Like, he holds to microevolution, but man, because microevolution is evolution anyway.
Well, how I see it. I think order of creationism, it offers an alternative in light of younger creationism, and like as long as like you don't think the universe is 6 to 10,000 years old, I think you're making some progress.
I honestly think his model would be perfect if he included evolution, which is technically what I've strived to do. I've taken everything else that he's provided, which is, again, cutting edge, but the incarnation part is still lacking, and I think I've unlocked a very important key. I've used a very important key, which is evolution, to unlock an important point, and that is the incarnation can only make sense, and the cosmos, the redemption of the cosmos, can only make sense in an evolutionary framework, not in a So here's that comment I gave to Heiser. Let me just bring it up. wonder if it's in this one. Ah, here it is. Do you see it?
Yep.
So this is what I wrote to him. I said, "Dear Mike, with respect to Genesis 6 and the Watchers, is it true that the location of their descent happens only on Mount Hermon?" Now, Hermon is far west, north, where Israel is. And
Is this about the reversing Herman thing?
yeah. Like how does the Neanderthal, location of Eden, the timing of the flood, like what, how do you relate all this? So, how would you relate to the current research that the Garden of Eden could be located somewhere in the Persian Gulf? Are there multiple locations or mountains if we were to take into account the location of Noah within this region where the Watchers descend? So Heiser responds by saying he's not sure why I'm asking this question, but he's presuming that it'll be connected to Eden, Ezekiel 32. He takes the position that Eden is a cosmic mountain idea, that it's not a real. It is precisely for this reason that we may be wise not to situate Eden at the Persian Gulf or anywhere else. But or one could say that the original Eden, God's original home on earth, had geography, hence the Persian Gulf, and the fall occurs there. And then the next Eden, which would be Hermon, was the scene of another rebellion, which is the Watchers in Genesis 6. That place, the forest, great tree, and so on. But then he says, all right. So then he says, I'm not sure that answers your question, but I'd recommend reading Lipinski's article that I referenced on the episode. Now, Lipinski's article actually gives me the answer, and it helps your model as well. Because in Lipinski's article, let me just reshare my slide again. This is what I write in my presentation. So, with respect to that Urarat, not the Ararat, but the Urarat word, look at the title of his article. El's Abode, Mythological Traditions Related to Mount Hermon and the Mountains of Armenia. And in the article, he speaks of the Nephilim Apkallu. So the Mesopotamian equivalent of Nephilim is the phrase Apkallu. In the Persian Gulf area, which is the location that to those giants in that study that you're just reading from. The unusually tall 6-foot people in this region. So the article that he referred to actually, again, helps our position on that.
So say what you said, but say it shorter in about like 3 sentences.
Okay. let me go back to the map again. Okay. This is the Persian Gulf. This in this photo on the left here. And the 4 rivers mentioned in Genesis meet up at this head here. And according to that article, the unusual height of people and a divine cosmic rebellion. So you have humans, a cosmic rebellion, and the Nephilim, all located within this region. And it's this region that gets flooded, as I show here in this middle map. So on the left photo here, everyone is located in this region. Then it gets flooded by a natural disaster, which God uses to bring judgment. And this is the present day. So your tall, you could connect it to the Neanderthals, but those tall humans we're talking about are all located here, alongside humans, which would be Noah and all that. There's a lot to go through, but I've got the material up on my Google Drive.
Basically, like the article matches up with the theological research as well, about like where Herman would have been at and stuff like that. Oh, so you're saying
All right. So you're saying like in the article where it talked about where these tall people would have been at, it matches the location of Herman.
Yes.
Oh,
And
okay.
The article was written, and look, this is the amazing thing about this scholar is that he wrote this in 1971, and just with scriptural evidence alone, alongside other ancient Near Eastern texts, he's able to pinpoint the locations of where this is happening. This interrelation of the sons of God and women, and he's saying it happens multiple times, but there is a location, which would be the location of the floods, the people that you were just talking about. Like can
Well, I
link it
guess
to
now
you.
in my model, I guess all I can even say is just like, as far as the biology behind it, on how exactly these angels biologically transform from these hyperdimensional beings into three-dimensional Homo sapiens, I don't know, but that's okay because like as
But
time
then
goes on, maybe we might find
when you saw the Noah film with Russell Crowe, there's an interesting connection he made. The director made with remember when they were watchers, those rock guys. Remember when they descend down and they turn into rock? Obviously, that's not what the text is saying, but there's an interesting analogy with that scene.
Oh
yeah, this is definitely this is like quasi science. It's like we're using peer review science, and at the same time is skating on thin ice with respect to something that's supernatural, and it's outside science.
Oh, yeah, and it's not Good Friday anymore. Now it's Good Saturday. But what are you doing for Resurrection Sunday or Easter? So forgive me for asking, but Easter and the Resurrection Day are not the same day, like holidays, right? Even though like some people confuse Easter, right, with the Resurrection Day, right?
Yeah. Today I'm eating a lot of chocolate.
I know they say Easter has to do with Ishtar and like the Ishtar eggs and semen or something like that. Like
yeah. But definitely a lot of chocolate for me. I've been craving it.
I should go to church.
Yeah, I'm going to church. Yeah, and I should. If I was where you are, like if I was seeing you, I would definitely try some cheesesteak.
Oh yeah, Philly cheesesteak.
Yeah, I don't know why my computer is bugging out on me.
Ooh, you're going robotic real bad, Wyatt.
Yeah.
Are you on your phone?
Nope. I'm on a second computer. I tried on my first computer, won't let me try on this, keeps kicking me out. Both keep kicking me out. I don't know why.
Try lowering your bandwidth up at the top. Maybe
that won't help much if he's already robotic.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, I have to go to church on Sunday, which is 3 to 4 hours out of my day.
3 to 4 hours? What?
Yep.
Oh gosh, that's too long to just be sitting there. Oh my gosh, I'm already in school.
Well, we don't really sit there. But Easter, Christmas, they're long masses that we do.
Yeah, I remember when my
Like I think the mass is 2.5 hours, and then you're kind of obligated afterwards to basically speak with the nuns for an hour and a half. So I prepared myself for 4 hours of having to hang around the church.
Really got quiet.
Yeah, surprisingly, that's what happens when we talk about going to church.
Oh,
just gets quiet and everyone leaves.
No, I'm responding to Greensaw. Letting him know that Wayne didn't know who he was, and he apologized for.
I've no idea who Green Soul is. He
Oh,
sounds
he's
familiar
cool.
though.
Yeah, he's cool. I almost want to say now I could be completely wrong, but I want to say I think he's Muslim or something. But if he's hearing me or listening to me, I apologize for not remembering for sure. But he is a cool guy. He really is. He's got a great sense of humor.
Well, that'd be a refreshing change. Like I used to love speaking with Farhan.
Yeah, and like I said, if he's listening, I apologize to him for not remembering what he is, because a lot of times on Google Plus he'll post like pictures of like from landscapes or buildings or things like the gold pagoda, in Japan, just really cool, pictures and stuff. But yeah, he's a nice guy, he really is.
Yeah, I didn't. So like, if somebody comes in, like I'm kind of like a little like edgy because people have been getting porn bombed and stuff like that, and people are still getting sniped. Like this is ridiculous. So I just don't know. So I guess like a new policy I'll say at the beginning of the hangout is like if I didn't invite them, just ask me or let me know like what you're going to do. So
a very good policy would just be like, if you want to invite somebody, like in the internal chat, like if you go to Gmail and the little chat box pops up, type it in there and ask, can I invite this person? So you take responsibility for whatever they do.
Right.
Because I think Heavy, you and I were in Floyd's Hangout, weren't we? Where it got porn bombed.
Oh God! Oh yeah, it was. Yeah. Luckily,
like, I hadn't seen a hangout get porn bombed in 2 years, so I was rather surprised by that.
Yeah, what I typed back to Greensaw, he didn't know who you was. He's cautious after porn bombs. I told him you're cool and that you pretty much apologized. You said you were sorry. So, but
yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I just didn't know who it was.
That's understandable. But he said no worries. Just wanted to say hi, and he hadn't seen me in a while. Yeah, but he's cool. He is.
Yeah, but Darwin's deity, he had to go no matter what. Because I've already seen where the conversations and hangouts go as soon as he enters the room, and like we just didn't have time to just like sit here and babysit him and give him all the attention.
Well, you see there, Wayne, what you're doing is you're using inductive reasoning. And what I'm wondering is, can you justify it? How exactly would you justify that within your worldview?
Yes, that is exactly how he is.
It's like I used to fucking joke about it. I would say like, if my cat jumped on my lap, I would say, oh shit, sorry, my cat kind of upset my computer or whatever. And he would go into like some script about the uniformity of nature. And then there's actually a hangout where something exactly analogous to that happened, where somebody goes like, oh, I'm sorry, I need to take my dog out for a walk. And he harps on about how they're using induction to make that kind of assessment.
Could it be that
he's just a prick? Yes.
Yeah, he has demonstrated that. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes I do wonder if there really is something psychologically wrong with certain people who hide behind the guise of religion. I'm just saying.
Well, in Darwin's case, I'd say there is something psychologically wrong with him, and it was he was homeschooled. So it's like no, I'm not even joking about it. It's just he is, when it comes to social interactions, he is, I hate to say it, but he is retarded in that area. He doesn't know actually how to develop or maintain social relationships with people.
No, that's true. I have observed that with him as well. It's a shame. Maybe we should have like a Google Plus networking event where we get to know different people and introduce ourselves and stuff.
We've tried a couple of things like that before. Like we tried doing a QI version of Google Hangouts, and it just devolved into everyone yelling at one another. We were going to make a Dungeons and Dragons group just to get people to socialize with one another. We never followed through with that. And then there were a few other ideas.
You know, one thing I've commented on a good bit is like sometimes you hear like atheists, some atheists, you know, really put down Christians as a whole at times. You know, I'm like, no, you can't do that. You can't make these blanket statements, you know, about a whole group of people, you know, because they're not all the same. And like a lot of the ones that we run into here, they're like the small group, you know, like we call them fundies or young earthers, and they don't represent a lot of the Christians that are out there, and it's a shame because when people that come on here, they see how the fundies do and everything, you know, they're thinking, well, yeah, you know, a lot of the other Christians out there do the same thing, especially if they haven't really been around them, and you know, much.
Well, that's kind of the problem. Is you don't really know if someone's an atheist or not when you meet them. That comes up maybe a couple months or years later. But if someone's a young Earth creationist, especially online, you know it right away. And so people kind of approach this community with a prejudice in mind. You know, like, oh, the atheists are these people who just want to get rid of religion. They hate God and they want to snuff religion out of existence. Why? Because that's what they've seen on TV. That's what they've been exposed to. And then they get here and it's, no, we just want to talk. And it's a good example of this would be how Hilarious Zulu kind of approached the community, where it was not too long ago where he was telling Hogtie that, oh, he would love to see Christians being beheaded. And Hogtie gave him shit for that because, no, of course not. We wouldn't want to see that. Some of us have very meaningful relationships with people of various theological persuasions. Wow. And you're telling us that we want to see their heads cut off. No, that's not accurate.
Oh, what?
Yeah, he genuinely said that.
Yeah, it's like some people, like, you know, Christians or whatever, they don't understand atheists. They say, oh, well, they hate God. How can we hate something we don't accept as real? It's like, I hate Santa Claus, or I hate the inner Easter Bunny, you know, stuff like that.
I don't know. I hate Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
I mean, it's like we can't hate a something we don't believe in or accept exists.
You know, it's kind of comparable to like when like it's kind of comparable to like how, you know, the KKK, right? They'll go and they'll tell their children, you know, you shouldn't be around black people. If you ever shake hands with a black person, your hand will fall off. Like, they start telling all these things about black people that just aren't true. And then you know, somebody will go out from the group and they'll meet a person. I'm black, as a matter of fact, if you don't know. And they'll be like, wow, like, that black guy is really cool. Like, he's really awesome. And like, I shook his hand and my hand didn't fall off or anything. Like, so it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that.
Do they honestly teach their kids that if you shake a black man's hand, your hand will fall off?
I've heard something like that said on Dr. Phil, where he was talking to a guest who they grew up in a racist community, and like they just told all these myths about black people. Like if a woman ever had sex with a black man, she would die. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
See, that's especially funny for me up here. Like, I live in Saskatchewan, and regrettably, there was, and there's remnants of it. There was a strong presence of the KKK within Saskatchewan about 60 to 70 years ago. And that attitude has persisted, we can say, mostly in the southern part of the province. But we've never heard shit like that. And what's especially funny about it is if you are a black person and you come up to Canada and you come up to like the northern half of the province of Saskatchewan, there's almost a reverse racist kind of attitude where if you went to the bar, Wayne, you could hook up with any chick there you wanted, and it would be like playing tennis with the net down because you were exotic.
Oh gosh.
It's racist, but it seems to be in your favor.
Yeah, but I don't want people being nice to me just because I'm black.
And they're not nice to you just because you're black. That's just the bonus bit. It's the girls want to shag you because you're black.
So I can walk up to them, I can just say something like, the legend is true.
Yep, pretty well, actually. That would probably be the best chat 'em up line that you could present. You know what? Screw it. I'm making a PayPal thing for you right now. We're gonna make a GoFundMe, and it's gonna be get Wayne up here just so he could use that chat line in bars in Canada.
Boy, now that's a pickup line if I ever heard one.
That's the best pickup line I've ever heard.
True. Well, see, I'm in North Carolina. Yeah, I'm in the good old South. You know, I used to live out years ago. I lived out in the county around Charlotte, in this area, and they were all white people. There were no blacks. And at first I didn't catch that, but then later on I did. One day there was a sign on this dirt at the entrance of this dirt road on the other side of the main street, and it was a Ku Klux Klan meeting. They were advertising on the sign, and I'm like, oh no. I went out, so I went somewhere, and I probably didn't even come home that night. I said, no, I'm getting as far away from these people as I can. I mean, they scare me, and I'm white.
But the sad thing was they kept following you because they thought you were Phil Robertson.
Oh dear. Oh, that Robertson. Oh, okay. I missed that. Someone called me that, and I completely missed it.
Carlos called you that.
I was thinking of the other Robertson, the preacher, 700 Club.
Pat Robertson.
Right. Okay, Phil. I got you. Well, that's the.
So that was Trust in Jesus. Carlos called you that. I think.
Yeah.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
I laughed my ass off when he said that.
Yeah. I should have came back at him as tried to do some kind of real Southern voice, like, "Boy, you better shut up, or I smack you." Or something.
Well, it's particularly funny because like in the last couple of hangouts I've seen about with Carlos in it, and he brings up homosexuality or whatever. And he goes to like
that's his favorite topic, right? I don't know. That's kind of
and that is his favorite topic. But he always goes back to the age of consent. Like it doesn't matter. Like he has to draw this equivocation between finding members of the same sex attractive to finding prepubescent children attractive. I don't know why he has to draw that connection. He just does.
I'm not saying anything.
The thing about it is he does look up to Phil Robertson. And Phil Robertson, if I believe, married his wife when she was 16. But he met her when she was 13, when he was 18. So when he was 21, he married her when she was 16. And the thing that was bad about that was Phil Robertson made this line at like some kind of a fundamentalist, like young earth creationist lecture. And he said, like, oh, better marry those girls off before they're full-grown women. That way they won't learn to talk back. And the whole crowd kind of laughed. Like, it's whatever. It's a crude joke. Except that's what he did. It's like, that's kind of disturbing.
I was looking for my camo hat so I could put that on.
Oh, do your impersonation.
Yeah, I've seen him in some videos, and I'm like, ooh wee, that's someone to avoid. Oh, but I was going to mention something that we were talking about a little before. You know, like about we hate God. If we hate anything, we hate how people use their religion, that's whichever religion it is, to kind of validate them being prejudiced or harmful to other people.
Well, it's using your Bible. The saying is using the Bible as a billy club.
Something like that, yeah. I'm sorry. It kind of gets me when they talk about people being prejudiced or something.
It's like I have no issue with people preaching at me. I have no issue with people saying that, you know, all you're doing is sin or whatever. Well, that I don't care. Whatever, you can tell me that. We can argue about it. We can have a discussion. We can go for coffee. It'll be a fun chat. But if you're one of those people who stands around with, you know, the God hates fag signs or something like that, screaming at people, you don't want to talk. You just want to just yell at everyone. Well, yeah, I don't like you.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with your beliefs. It has entirely everything to do with just how you're behaving.
You're a terrible person.
Like it's a very almost paradoxical thing where it's like I have family members who are born again Christians. You know, like my family's predominantly Eastern Orthodox, and then my one aspect of my family, my auntie, decided that she had some awakening or some revival. Now she spends an hour of the day rolling on the ground, speaking in tongues, and yeah. And she raised her children accordingly. Love them. They're my cousins. Fun guys. She's a wonderful person. But they say things that I fundamentally disagree with. But when they talk to me about these issues, it's from a point of genuine concern for me. And I appreciate that. When it's just somebody, you know, like standing in front of an abortion clinic or standing in front of a courthouse, that's just someone kind of showcasing themselves as, look at me, I'm such a good Bible-believing Christian. Y'all are just terrible people. And it's like, I have far more respect for my aunt, an endless amount of respect for my aunt, than I would ever have for somebody who's making a showcase of themselves.
Well, see, that's just it.